I'll work with people from all walks of life, but everyone's goal is still the same. They want to live a great life. They want to do what they love to do forever, but they want to make sure that they're not sitting out on their life while their family moving forward.
When I contacted you, I was coming off the back end of 2 heart surgeries, as you know. Now you know what you did for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
We're done. It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. All right, John, it's good to have you back again. I was just looking at the YouTube. It was 7 years ago.
Wow.
That you were out here, right? So it's been a while. So what's been going on?
Everything. I feel like 7 years, everything has changed. Everything has evolved. I really look at that 7 years ago being here is like almost like a starting point to what I'm doing now with the education, with a lot of the coaching that we're doing. And I think it led to even a book, but it was definitely a turning point coming out, working with you at elitefts, spending a lot of time out here and kind of finding the next path forward.
I thought it was like 4 years, to be honest. And then when I looked, I'm like,
I get hit with those things on Facebook that are like, hey, this happened 6 years ago, 7 years ago, 8 years ago. And I just got hit with the one that was, I think it was 8 years ago, was the first one where it was like, hey, we were teasing the Fixing Dave Tate. And that was the first video that dropped. And then a couple months later, that was when the series started.
So it's 8 years.
The process started 8 ago because as I remember it, it was a call around Thanksgiving or Christmas of 2018.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So is this an 8-year checkup?
This is an 8-year checkup.
See how well the fixes have held. The tape is still holding up.
You can think of it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was 300 pounds at the time.
Yeah.
So I'm 228 now.
Yeah.
You know, so fixed.
Perfect. There's the advert marketing done. Done.
Where I want to jump off here is when I think of it, when we see the PR, like, so you look and the PR is overrated, right? Because everybody's breaking PRs across the board. But here's the thing with it. Everybody knows what it is, right? Because when they actually do it, it feels like a PR. So a lot of the things that people will denote as a PR are just like the rep PRs and so forth. And we kind of all know that's bullshit, right? Mm-hmm. But everybody inherently knows what a PR feels like. Mm-hmm. So I want to flip that and say, what is functional then, right? Because everybody will have these different ideas of what it is. And it goes in phases of like weirdo and all this other kind of stuff. I think my default to that is, you know it when you feel it. You see what I'm saying?
Exactly.
And so how would you go about defining that?
Well, functional training is super polarizing, like you're saying, and we have had people bastardize it to the point where now we have the zealots saying like, oh, just because I bicep curl and my biceps are supposed to be as big as possible, this is functional for me. It's like, hold on a second there. What I really deem as functional is that you have a complete human movement system. You're simply moving the way that we were designed to move, and that it's a complete movement profile, and you have a training program that at least maintains that for life. And I think that it's not a single exercise, but it's a blend of all the different movements that you would do throughout a training week or a training block that allows you to simply not lose your physical movement capacities.
Mm-hmm. So would any training program that doesn't lead to that outcome not be functional by your definition?
I think there's different seasons of training and different seasons of life, but with every single one of my clients and my athletes, we have to have a bare minimum of the movement patterns in, even if we're touching upon them a couple reps per week or even a couple exercises per 12-week training block. But I do think that if we don't have a reactivation of every single one of these movement patterns, you are going to be at default a little bit dysfunctional, because eventually you're going to be leading to breakdowns, or where you guys are most focused on is performance plateaus. You know, these two things go together. If you're not strong and you're not healthy for the long term, it's going to be hard to work hard enough and to stay consistent enough to be able to weather the storm of your training volumes and intensities for long enough to actually achieve what you're capable of.
True. So when you're working with athletes, you have quite a predetermined end goal, right? Like, tennis player is the quality of their tennis play, football player, they're sprinting, they're jumping, etc. When we're looking at functional training then for someone who is not an athlete? What does that mean to you? So what, obviously the outcome is I do X, their sport performance goes up. Whereas if we've got Gen Pop individual here does functional training, what is the transfer that we're looking for in everyday life that tells you that this style of functional training is doing its job?
Well, even with the athletes that I'm managing, I think it's counterintuitive because I'm not managing them to be bigger, faster, or stronger. I'm managing them to be healthier. Most likely the scenario is that they're already the best at what they're doing, whether they're a high school athlete, whether they're a collegiate athlete, whether they're a professional, or they're into master's level of competition in any sport or any different demographic there. But what we're essentially trying to do is allowing them to be at their best. And the only way that we can get there is to be healthy and is to be able to be orthopedically healthy and also systemically healthy. So I don't necessarily manage my Major League Baseball players any different than my powerlifters, any different than my mom of 4 who just wants to lose 20 pounds, who wants to go out and run that 5K and just look super jacked at the pool. So I think that lifelong performance is what we should be going after. But we are looking at the metrics of health from a qualities perspective of orthopedic health, aka does your body move and function mechanically right? And then also systemically health. Are you internally healthy? And if you can hit both of those things, then we can start to talk about sports performance. Then we can start to talk about specific specialties. But before that happens, it's really difficult to go into a specific goal set because we are essentially building the pyramid on a house of cards.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that there is essentially a foundational or almost universal outcome from which all different sports performance qualities, whatever variation of performance you might be interested in, stems from. Would that be fair to say?
Exactly. And there's a misconception out there because we see so much sexy polarization of sports performance, especially when it comes to Instagram and YouTube. And what people aren't seeing are University of Wisconsin's football team, or they're not seeing NBA strength coaches working with their guys 2 times a week, 25 minutes per session, where they're essentially using the rule of opposites. The rule of opposites states that we need to be able to give them a physical trait and skill set that they're not automatically getting in their sport. So with powerlifting, what are the other pieces that we need to put into play in order to make you resilient? With basketball, we're already doing a lot of jumping and cutting and low level cardio and high end conditioning. What are we not getting? Most likely base strength and hypertrophy. So these rule of opposites is what creates a stronger system more holistically.
Sure. So what is that ideal for you then? If you could summarize that, you said that kind of core universal principle from which all other athletic prowess performance level, like what is that thing that you're striving for then? Is it some form of balance? But like, what is the balance, if you get what I'm saying? Like, how do you summarize it?
Yeah, the balance is between managing, we like to call a 6x6 protocol. It means that from your movement patterns perspective, you have a complete movement spectrum. That's squat, hinge, lunge, push, pull, carry, and rotational based patterns. Those are the 6 foundational movement patterns. But once you have those, we need to start specializing into physical capacities and characteristics. There are 6 of those as well. I like the number 6 way too much. We call it the 666 protocol, and then we're like, no, just keep it 6x6.
Yeah.
But the 6 physical characteristics are power, strength, hypertrophy or your body composition, cardio and conditioning, mobility, and athleticism. Many times when I go in to audit an athlete or a client's program, those are the first 6 I look at is, hey, do you have a complete movement system? Most times not. 1 or multiple are deactivated. And then are you having a well-rounded training effect in terms of all your physical capacities? Many times people are dabbling in 1 or 2 of the characteristics and not actually getting exposure to all 6.
So when you say a complete movement profile, sorry, I know I misreferenced you there, but what does that mean precisely? So those are the 6 movement patterns that you're using to assess an individual. I think we can all agree that they're pretty good ones, but everyone, we can watch 100 people do a split squat and you can probably call all of them a split squat on the broadest definition, right? So what is within those movement patterns? You're obviously looking for certain things, right? So how do you determine that like this movement pattern is not where I want? There must be like a reference standard that you're looking for. So are there any kind of universal references that you're using, like an athlete should be able to do X, Y, and Z for me to say that movement pattern is functional, not deactivated, or whatever the terminology is that you want to use?
Well, the first thing that I look at is the piece of paper that they hand me and their past training blocks. what does your past training block look like? If you haven't trained something in over 3 months, most likely you've been deactivated in terms of motor skill acquisition and motor control, and the ability to have that not be a novelty in your training plan. So the easiest thing that you can do is re-implement that movement pattern in, and you can find the hardest thing that they can do well. You can re-implement an exercise variation that can fit their body, and then you go from there. But in terms of a quality quotient, I think that's what you're getting at, Tom, is like, how do you quantify quality or functional movement? I think that it is one of the hardest things to look at. And I'm in the business of looking at subjective movement and subjective pain response. And you mash those two things together, and that's what I'm doing on a daily basis. And I think that's what a lot of coaches and trainers are doing on a daily basis. But I think there's universal principles of quality movement. And I think it starts off with the spinal position and the pillar position, the way that you manage the ball and socket joints, the shoulders and the hips, and the way that you're able to manage a neutral zone in the spine. And then on top of that, our other criteria is how we manage unwanted rotation throughout the planes. And it doesn't mean that there's no rotation. Everyone's just like stuck into a machine. It means that we have control over the tension, control over the stability, control over your mobility through full ranges of motion that I feel really good about. When we go through and screen at Pain-Free Performance, we're looking at spine neutrality, shoulder and hips being able to be stabilized, and not having force leakings happening from the rotary planes.
Okay. So if we're using, correct me if I'm wrong here, but if we're using the ability to maintain the integrity of the spinal unit, that's for whatever terminology you want to use there, throughout these movement patterns. So for you, is that the biggest indicator of quality? Like, you can perform this squat pattern, say this overhead press or whatever it might be, this loaded carry, and you're capable of maintaining the integrity of that unit whilst you perform that movement, I presume loaded to some degree.
Yeah, strategically, we want to be able to look at that as the starting point, because that allows us to say, hey, with low level load or even with body weight load, we are competent with our own body moving through space. I think that is something that is super unsexy to say, but it is a foundation that everyone should be able to move your body through space without load before we go into load, which we do extraordinarily quickly. But then from there, it's how do we actually maintain and have a neutral controlled group of your spinal position, so then we can start exploring where we can go from there. You know, without knowing where your baseline is, it's really hard to be able to push the envelope when it comes to how much flexion can I get, how much extension can I get, how much rotation is still safe for me, because there are certain performance enhancement metrics that we can get into breaking some of the neutral zones.
Sure. So, sorry, go on, Dave.
Well, so if we regress that back, then the bracing and breathing is going to be the most important thing.
Oh, yeah.
Which that would have to be taught before the single leg motion that you're talking about, right? Because they're going to be twisting and falling apart because they don't know what they're doing.
That's the most common thing that I see with faulty movement patterns, are people that just aren't moving well, whether it be due to novelty, whether it be due to pain, and probably a combination of both of those things. But before anyone even starts to move in our programs, before we put them through our first training session, those are the foundational skills that we teach: breathing and bracing. No matter what you do, no matter how you train, no matter what your sport is or what your daily life looks like, you are going to have to some level be able to coordinate your brace and be able to breathe and have those things interact together on a sliding scale. One goes up, the other goes down. It's not an all or nothing phenomenon, but we do need to tap into how much neurological skill, intention, and recruitment can we get, keeping us in safe and effective positions.
How often do you find the person coming in knows how to breathe and brace?
Zero. I am guilty of it myself. I am guilty of it myself. I was out there teaching courses around the world, teaching breathing and bracing, and you think you know a lot. You think you are teaching somebody to the top end level of your knowledge base. But I think sometimes you got to get out of your comfort zone, and you got to get into different environments and different experts that truly know their shit in an aspect of training that you don't. I think one of the eye openers for me was in 2015, 2016, I started coming out to Columbus, Ohio. I have an anecdote in the book that has me over at the Spot Athletics with JL Holdsworth, and we're doing a lower body session. And I think I'm in pretty good shape, you know, like not the biggest or the strongest guy, but like I'm still doing pretty well. JL's moving next to me, and he's kind of looking at me like, what the fuck is this guy doing? Like, what in the hell? And then finally we get like 3 or 4 sets into squats, and he just stops me, takes me out of the squat rack, and he goes, "Come here." I'm like, what was about to happen? He goes, wrap your arms around my torso. And I'm like, I hug him. And he's like, no, grab it tight. I'm like, okay, man, this is getting really awkward. I'm glad it's 6 a.m. right now because nobody else is in the gym. And he goes, all right, get ready for this. And then he goes, and he breaks my grip. And he goes, that's how you lift 1,000 pounds. And that was an amazing eye opener for me because I'm like, all right, I know how to coordinate my shoulders and my hips and my core and the synergistic sling system and the anterior oblique sling and all this science. But this guy just showed me that rapidly he turned on everything that I've been talking about in terms of the pillar complex, agile and rapidly, to the point where it was an eye opener where, okay, how did you do that? And that was probably a 2-year period where I wanted to go in and I wanted to know, what is the top end of somebody's ability to brace? What is the top end of somebody's ability to exchange air to be able to maximize that brace? And how do we take air and brace and actually then translate it into somebody moving through space? And working with you, working with a lot of the guys out here in Columbus, I think that I took my level from what I thought was a 10 out of 10, which was actually like a 5 out of 10, up to like a 7, 8, 9 by the time I got out of here. And we started teaching breathing and bracing totally differently, because when I essentially realized that it was a skill that needed to be practiced over and over and over again in order to reach your apex of what you're able to do and then scale it back down in order to match it to your activity at hand, that was a game changer for my particular lifting, for my performance in the gym, and my ability to go out and teach my clients. And I think it took another couple years in order to actually teach it in a system the way that we're doing in Pain-Free Performance today, like a step-by-step on how you exchange air, how you brace, and then how you move. Not move and then try to pick up your brace, not just move and then breathe however you want, but have that as the key, the marquee part of the way that you're prepping for movement.
Go ahead.
Do you think there is an upper ceiling to how well someone can do that?
Yes. I think a lot of those upper ceilings are explored right in this gym right here. And those are the best bracers in the world. I don't think anyone would argue that. But I think that where people get lost is they look at like, hey, heavy lifting or bracing, it is the same for everyone all the time. We are just going to maximally brace like we are lifting 1,000 pounds for every single thing. But then all of a sudden you get into a goblet squat for 30 reps and you're pushing your limits and you're like, no, you can't brace the same way. You can't breathe the same way. So there has to be a dimmer switch on the way in which you're able to expose yourself to your top end limits in terms of your bracing and your breathing, and then having to dial it back down based on being able to open up your movement system, be a little bit more dynamic, explore more full ranges of motion, and essentially be more athletic with your movement.
So if maintaining that core pillar, we're going to use that term because I like that very much, thank you, is integral to having the quality of movement that you're looking for, I would then ask the question, is it even possible for an athlete to have the quality of movement that you want if they don't have that nailed down?
I don't believe so. That is why it's one of the first chapters in the Pain-Free Performance book. And this is something that I'll do before anyone starts to move under my care, is that I need to know baseline that they know how to breathe and that they know how to actually create tension through their pillar system. And I think that that is one of the biggest potentiators of safety in the gym, but also performance, because both of those things go together when you really think about it. If we can maximize muscular recruitment, if we can minimize force leak, and we can really have movement quality stand up against stress and load, then you're going to get a desired training effect that is a super positive one. So without that, I think that people can dabble into performance PRs. I think that they can get in and they can build muscle and do things, but these are usually the people that end up coming to me because they're banged up, they're injured, or they're plateaued out to the point where they can't withstand the training volumes that they need to continue to progress.
I'm going to spin it back with the bracing, because I'm going to disagree a little bit, because I don't believe there is a top end, because if you look outside, powerlifting and strength sports, and you get into MMA or jiu-jitsu or the temple that you went to, I mean, there's people that have like ridiculous amounts of bracing, where there's definitely going to be like I hate that word, optimal, but a necessary bracing skill required for whatever the task is that one's supposed to do. What we find often is a strength athlete will know how to, I say kinda anymore, kinda brace to be able to hold it for that 8-second movement. But when we ask them to brace while dragging a sled from there to there, their ability to be able to hold that is terrible.
Yeah.
Right. And the only way that they can hold it is they have to reduce the amount of tension that they're putting in that brace to be able to do that. And that's fine because it will be able to do that. But that also tells you that they can train that quality to keep that higher tension and more, as they go through that, which would lead to higher performance with the loads.
No, I would say, if we bring it back to your fundamental movement patterns, there's a lot of people all doing those movement patterns that are not in good shape, right? Like,
yes,
there are plenty of people doing those 6 things and then are coming to you being like, I'm still beat up, right? So is it the movement patterns themselves that are the magic, or is it the ability, like those do those 6 movement patterns and the ability to brace and maintain the spine in its integrity through those variety of different, should we say, challenges, deviations, whatever you want to call it, is that where the benefit really lies?
Well, let's define bracing a little bit deeper here.
Yeah.
So the first thing that we do is a premeditated bracing sequence. A premeditated bracing sequence is like, you don't know shit. You're going into the gym for the first time, or you're injured and your system is all screwed up where you have to rebuild it, and you're trying to have the building blocks actually stack up again. That is a premeditated brace. Think about the way in which you're bracing, going down to a barbell and deadlifting it off the floor. Premeditated. It is going to be very predictable. That is step 1. We want to get people to step 1 because most people are missing step 1. So we're not going to go on to step 2 yet. But once you actually start to flirt with step 1's mastery, then you get into the next level of bracing, which is what Dave is talking about with a reactionary brace. The example that Dave used was dragging a sled. Well, every single step with the sled is going to have a perturbation. It's going to have a force change. It's going to have different challenges on the system that cannot be premeditated and prepared for. That is a reactionary brace.
Are you feeling like you're not the man you're supposed to be? Low confidence, negative thoughts polluting your brain. That's me. I get it. I've been dealing with messed up hormones most of my life. A couple years I hooked up with Merrick Health, and it was one of the best things that I ever did. They're a health optimization platform that does advanced lab works and goes deeper than probably what you've ever seen before. What you'll get with Merrick Health is they have guided optimization and the self-service diagnosis. I personally have been using the guided optimization for the whole time I've been with him. Dry is my health coach. He does an amazing job. The second route that they have is the self-service diagnostics. This is just a DIY with your own health journey. You just head over to Merrick Health, pick the panel, and they'll send you the report. You just kind of go from there. Either way, I highly recommend them, and you can get 10% off right now. Just head over to merrickhealth.com and use the code TABLETALK at checkout.
So in order to be reactionary with your brace, you need to actually bring down your top end brace. You need to start exchanging air, and you need to be a little bit more agile and athletic with your response to the changing challenges. Now that is where an MMA athlete or my baseball athletes or my football athletes, that's where we want to get them. But I think that there are 2 different things, but they go together: premeditated and reactionary brace. The better we can get with our premeditated brace and the higher the ceiling that we can build on that, the higher the potential we can use in terms of being able to fine tune our reactionary brace. Because we can't go out on the football field and brace the same way off the line as we're doing on the deadlift platform. That's just ridiculous. But a lot of coaches are training their athletes to only premeditated brace when we don't actually transfer it in. That's the biggest reason that we love some sort of unconventional lifting, carries, pulls, sleds, things that can actually get you out of your comfort zone and have you figuring out how to link up your body segments in order to actually maintain the minimal effective brace while still staying agile and athletic. That is the name of the game for being able to force reproduce and also force transference, especially in any type of sport.
Yeah. Well, I would say they're like the loaded carry of all those movement patterns. The loaded carry really is the only one where you're trying to set the brace and then the 2 halves of the pelvis are changing, right? They're rotating under you. Nothing else is going to teach that. So you could be as good as you want bracing, even on a split squat perhaps, but then as soon as you have to start having the pelvis move underneath you repeatedly.
Exactly.
You have to be. So for you then, is that why the loaded carry comes in that sixth spot? Because you've got this football player here who needs to be ready to take a hit whilst they're running. They can be the strongest squatter bracer in the world here. Maybe they're even great at their split squat. But do you find that loaded carry is needed there as that transitional step to get them to carry that over to all those other more active dynamic movements?
Loaded carry is going to be like the OG of the carry pattern, but the way that we define carry is carrying your body through space. This is actually locomotion of the body. This is anything with a step and a reciprocation. So this could be anything from sprinting to running to agility and change of direction drills, all the way up into crawling. It's that same mechanism that you have a reactionary brace with because you're going arm opposite of leg. As soon as you go arm opposite of leg, you have the pelvis rotate opposite directions, exactly like you're saying, but you also have the scapula move in opposite directions. And that's where we're going to be the most athletic. That's where we're going to find ourselves in these unilateral base approaches and having stresses on the system asymmetrically. That is what's going to transfer back into function a little bit better than anything else, but it's also going to transfer into performance because 85+% of our movement lives are in asymmetrical stances at the upper and lower body. We just need to be training that a little bit more, but it is the perfect pattern to be able to train the reactionary brace. But I would say also as well, the lunge specifically allows us to taper into unilateral based lower body approach. So it's not just split squat. It could be lunges. It could be curtsy lunges. It could be lateral lunges. It could be forward lunges. It could be locking lunges. It could be Bulgarian split squats. It has the same exact mechanism of that the pelvis being able to rotate in opposite directions and allows us to be able to train that exact trait. And that's one of the biggest reasons why single leg work is so devastatingly hard, is because you have that aha moment and you have the oh shit moment that happens when you're training because of that lack of stabilization, where you're kicking on things that are out of the sagittal plane.
When you're coaching an athlete, then with these loaded carry, and I love that you include a sprint and stuff in that, but for the sake of simplicity here, let's just go with like a farmer's walk, because that's something everyone can relate to. How do you coach that then? Because you can do a farmer's walk, and I mean this in no derogatory way. You could do it like a pro strongman, which is leant forward, essentially falling repeatedly and catching yourself to move the biggest weight as fast as you can, whatever the end goal is. I presume that's not how you're coaching those movements, though, for it to carry over to here where you want it. So what is different and how are you coaching those things? Because it's probably very easy to get good at those without getting the benefit as well. Yeah,
the base level quality movement quotients that we were speaking about before, which is going to be your spinal position and is also going to be the management of rotation. We look at the loaded carry as the full body functional diagnostic, meaning that you have load on the system, you have perturbations and rotation happening from the shoulder, you're interacting with load at the hands with a radiation, you're actually stepping through space, having to manage your pelvis and ground force contact, and you have to manage your core being able to reciprocally move right to left in terms of its stabilization pattern. So this is something that we want to keep a high quality quotient up. When somebody loaded carries with us, we want to be able to have a normalized step, we want to have the spine in neutrality, and we want to be able to have it look smooth and articulate still. You know, there's times and places where we're going to go max effort loading and we're going to go a 30-second max loaded carry, but that's more of like a testing scenario than a training scenario. I think the way in which we move the load around, the way in which we actually normalize our gait cycle, that's where we're going to get the maximum amount of gains, training that specific pattern for functional transference, not just for weight on the rig.
So when you're saying spine and neutrality, right? What does that mean? And why I'm asking this is what we find is the default for most people now, and everything goes in phases, right? Is that they're too posterior. Right. So you got to become more anterior to become neutral. Right. But that becomes a weird thing because if they're already neutral and we tell them to go anterior, then they're super anterior. But that is all part of setting that brace, trying to figure out what that neutrality is.
Exactly.
So how would you go about defining that?
So the zone of neutrality at the spine, this is a really intriguing topic that we try to like peel back the onion on with pain-free performance because it's not so black and white. I think people out there think like, oh man, if you flex your spine on a deadlift, you're going to hurt your lower back. If you have a kyphotic curve out of the deadlift, you're definitely going to have some disc herniations at your neck. You know, all these things are going to lead to, hey, if your performance setup is not perfect neutrality in terms of you maintaining perfect spinal alignment, that you're going to be be automatically injurious. And that's just not the case. A zone of neutrality is a fluid concept, meaning that we have these buffering zones into flexion and extension, side bending, and degrees of rotation. And I see that there are many different factors that can actually lead to having you have a wider zone of neutrality or a more narrow zone of neutrality. And those things aren't just novelty. It's not just load capacity. It's not just overall training volume. Those are the things that people really do look at, and I think we have a good appreciation for. You don't want to go too heavy, too quick on too novel of a movement. That will lead to most likely you injuring yourself over time more so than if you weren't to manage those variables. But you have to think about everything else that's going on in your life, because you have all these different biopsychosocial, social, physical aspects of how can it shrink or expand your zone of neutrality. You think about hydration levels, nutrition quality, sleep quality, daily positions. You're looking at all these different variables, even lifestyle stresses. Did you just have a fight with your wife? Did your kids just misbehave at school? What are the things that are stressing you out? Because you only have so many fucks to give. And then when you get into the gym, that can be a totally different thing in terms of your zone of neutrality. So I think this is a more fluid, dynamic thing than ever before. But I think one of the things that we want to be able to communicate, especially to empower people around like, hey, you don't always have to be picture perfect with your form, especially with spinal neutrality, is that the more skill that you build around flirting with your end range zones, the more you can expand those zones. Mm-hmm. You guys see it every single day in here. You're like, that doesn't look biomechanically perfect, but that guy just hoisted and I haven't seen him injured at his back in 25 years. Mm-hmm. It's because he is a master of going out to his end range neutral zone of neutrality, and he's able to explore that and be able to be just on the line of where he can get a performance enhancement, but also stay in that zone where he's mitigating the risk of injury. And I think that this is so fluid, but for the average person out there lifting, their zone is very narrow. For the average person lifting in here, their zone is going to be very wide, but it's going to be changing on a day-to-day, which makes all or nothing lifting in terms of form, or every form being something that everyone has to adhere to, just a thing of myth.
Mm-hmm. But I know you say in your book, and I agree before I ask this question, there is no universal neutral spine as such. And I agree. But then the question then becomes, you get someone in your door, how do you teach them what neutral is if there is no neutral? Universally, like there must be a key indicator that person can feel within themselves, or that you can see on a person that says like, that's your central point, whatever we want to call it, that you can deviate either way from, but that's where you want to be as like your reference. How does someone get a feel for that? What is it they're actually looking for that tells them that?
I think 15 years ago, I was looking for the perfect zone of neutrality, the perfect position that somebody could be able to gain and then maintain throughout movement. Mm-hmm. And you would like try to position somebody into the perfect position, and then they'd fall out of it. It's the equivalent of like a kid slouching in school, mm-hmm. and the teacher being like, sit up straight, and then 2 minutes later being back here. It's a habit. Mm-hmm. So what we're trying to look at now is having your human body movement system be able to be the dictator of where you are in neutral and where you are the strongest and the most stable. We use the pillar cueing sequence to be able to achieve this. It's not just about the spine. The thing that nobody's talking about is the way that we're managing tension and recruitment at the shoulders and the hips, mm-hmm. 2 ball and socket based joints. First most mobile joint in the body, second most mobile joints in the body. The way in which we're able to manage those, be able to start kicking on tension from tertiary stabilizers like the pecs and the lats, it will be able to create centration at the shoulder that can feed back to where we can start to build brace and neutrality at the spine for everyone. That's going to be a little bit different. The same thing can be said down at the hips. We're teaching a co-contraction between the glutes and the adductors to have that spiral tension be able to then set the hips and the pelvis. From there, that's where we're looking at being able to use the breath and the bracing technique to be able to then lock that in. But as you alluded to, everyone's going to be different. Mm-hmm. Anthropometrics and bony anatomy of every single human being is going to be different. People will have commonalities. We'll all have curves in our spine. It's not just a straight thing. But the way in which we manage the hips and also the shoulders is going to dictate where we can get the quality of brace. And I have people finding their own neutrality. Mm-hmm. I can't just tell them where to go. And they can only find that from those neural links that they can kick on based on tension and recruitment.
So when they get that, then that's, what is it? You know what I mean? When you're like, there's going to be an aha moment, I presume, at some point where they do a lift and they found their neutral. What is the thing that causes the aha? Do you get what I'm saying? Like, what, there's going to be a sensation or a feeling or something's going to happen where they come to you and they say X, Y, or Z, and you're like, that's it.
Yeah, it's usually the quality of their breathing will go up, so they'll be able to inhale more. They'll be able to really like lock down their brace harder. And I hear it every single day that people are hitting pain-free PRs within a couple of sessions. And you're like, you didn't get bigger or stronger in a couple of sessions. The quality of your movement, the quality of your brace, and the quality of you finding that neutrality at the spine that actually dictate performance is the thing that we're looking for. So I'll see that time and time again. You know, I'm not seeing this from somebody going from like 900 to 1,000-pound squatting. I'm seeing this from 50-year-old ladies that are like, holy shit, I just hit 225 for 5 on the trap bar deadlift today. I've never even touched 200 before. And then you see the video and the form feedback on it. You're like, that is exactly what it is. It's almost like you had more gas in your tank. And as soon as you have that, they're able to feel this aha moment of really minimizing force leak, feeling strong and stable, but also having like all of their muscular effort actually go to the lift and not just bleed out of it.
In that scenario, how do you work around the kind of chicken and egg scenario where I totally get what you're saying, tensioning the ball and socket joints, like creating like contralateral tension around them, however you want to put it, slings, etc. How do you deal with, though, the idea that that can create the right environment for the brace, but then also if the breath isn't right in the first, like if they're a chest breather, right, and everything's going up here, well, they can't do that, right? So there's an art. I totally get what you're saying. You set this tension, then you can breathe better. But if you breathe better, you can set this tension better. So do you just find that teaching that kind of like 4-corner viewpoint of it first helps, and then they can get the breath? Or do you find that varies? Because like some people are not going to get their head around one of those, at least, I imagine.
Yeah, so I'll always start with the breath first. The breath first is to have an appreciation of what it is to do a 360-degree expansion around the torso. And that will start with something like corrected breathing, with a person down on the ground, with their chest facing the ground and their belly on the ground, being able to expand into that belly and into the lower back. And that usually takes a minute or 2 minutes for people to be like, wow, the biofeedback from the ground, I feel something different. From there, you're like, okay, I have an opportunity point. Then you sit them up and start to do it from a seated position where you start to go shoulders, hips, breathe, brace, move. And at that point, it's always the breath before the brace, because as you alluded to, a brace without a breath, that's what everyone's trying to do.
Yeah, sure.
That's why they're failing.
So, and I asked this question in agreement with you, but it's an interesting dilemma, I guess. Like, we get people who come to train, like we had a guy at one of the recent training ourselves who's multiply squatting like 1,100 plus, right? And then you go over breathing and bracing and rooting as well. And then he's like, oh, I wasn't doing that, or I wasn't doing it that way nearly to that extent, whatever, it doesn't matter. Right? So my question to you then is, why does everyone default away from it? Because I agree with you in how integral it is. We see it all the time. And it improves performance, it improves, like, pain goes away, range of motion, all of these wonderful things happen. So why are we wired to not do it, do you think, personally? And some people get incredibly far in spite of it rather than because of it. So how does this happen?
Well, the sexiest thing is moving. Moving under load, hitting PRs, everything with the dynamic component is what we have a focal point on. It's not the 15 or 20 seconds before a lift that people are thinking about. They're thinking about, hey, I'm just going to go into execution mode on the actual moving parts and the mechanics of this specific movement or this specific lift. So I think that people just ended up not really respecting the breath or the brace, or not thinking that they need to do it. Or in a lot of populations, I hate to say it, it's just people being lazy. They just want to get the work in, they want to get the work done, and they don't care about the quality quotient, and they don't care about the preparation. In their minds, they're like thinking about anything other than going into the movement. Oh, it's time to go in for the movement. Let's just get it done, and then let's do another rest period, and they totally zone out. I'll have clients, I have great clients, and I shouldn't just shit on my clients, but I'll have a client that will come every now and then that will not remember what we did session to session. I've been training you for 3 years. We've been using the same 6-phase dynamic warm-up for multiple years at this point. What are we doing for a warm-up today? What's this one again? Foam rolling of the quads? And they don't actually have a movement mastery mindset. They never have the goal to have a movement mastery mindset. They want the end result without the work or the preparation or the respect of the lifting game or the training game to be able to be a process. And I think that's okay for some people, but it's okay until it's not. And these are the same people that end up either getting bored with their training or plateauing out or just really being disappointed with the results. And at that point in time, you have to be like, no, there's more of a process to this. And I especially think climbing to the next level, anyone can just move. Anyone can just subload and get a workout in. We're talking about actually training and eliciting adaptations from a strength or a hypertrophy training effect or a power training effect. Those are two totally different things.
Do you think the problem is that what you're talking about, we're talking about, setting, I would maybe say that's kind of like setting the internal environment appropriately. Do you think a lot of it is just that you can't see it that well? Like someone can do a 2-rep max and brace very well on one, brace not so well on the other, and they kind of look similar. We can all probably say one looks a little bit worse, they'll move worse, but there's nothing that like just jumps out of them like, oh, that second squat, I clearly didn't brace well enough. Like there's no shining light to say like it was good or bad. Do you think that's a big part of the problem, or do you think it's just like an education thing where people just don't think it's that important to start with anyway?
I don't think they think it's that important. I don't think they think it's that important until they're forced to think it's important based on breaking down or plateauing. And at that point, I think things need to change for people. But up until that point, if somebody's coming in and they're squatting 1100 in gear, who's to say that that's not working for him? The only way he's going to change is he's going to come in and get work with Dave, and Dave's going to tell him somebody who he respects, and making a change, or he's going to get hurt and end up with me, or he's going to just burn out. And then something's going to need to change in order to move on with your lifting career. But up until that point, I think everyone hits that point eventually, is that they have this crossroads where it's like, what I was doing was working to some extent. Will it work for the next year? Will it work for the next 5 years, next 10 years, next 2 decades? Because a lot of strength athletes, a lot of lifters, this is what we love to do. And I think that we eventually hit that crossroads where we've done a lot of good things. We've worked hard, we've stayed consistent, but the quality of actually having a movement mastery mindset, of having this be something that we have to tune into and be more intelligent with, it's more than just the physical efforts. It's the mental efforts that need to go in. And a lot of those people that I work with, they deal with those crossroads all the time. And it's being able to have them build up a little bit stronger and more intelligently and be more of a student of the game, student of their own body.
I think you just nailed it, because in my opinion, where that gap is they're doing, but they're not feeling. Right. So they're doing the thing, but they're not mentally processing how that feels. And sometimes they do, because they'll be like, man, that felt right. Like, okay, what felt right? They're not taking that and putting that and connecting those dots unless they're really serious about what they're doing, and trying to go to that next level. Some people just never get there, but that feedback, kind of gauges where all that will go.
Why do you think then, in both your opinions, like that mindset, if you're in karate or tennis or volleyball or name any sport here, right? There would be a mindset, at least in good coaches and good athletes, that would be there 100%. Let me varying degrees perhaps, and again, I don't want to talk ill of people, but then you look at like the strength sports, and even at the top level, that mindset doesn't necessarily seem to be there to the same degree. So why did we skip the boat on that?
I don't think it's just the strength athletes skipping the boat. Like a different lifetime ago, I was working as a strength and conditioning coach and a physical therapist on the Women's Tennis Association's tour, traveling the world, working with a key top 25 player. And she was awesome. 6'2", 180-pound, absolute beast. One of the best athletes that I've ever trained. But she was dealing with shoulder pain, lower back pain, hip labral tear, feet that didn't work. She was banged up.
Staying hydrated is huge for training and performance. And this is why today's episode is brought to you by Element. Element gives you exactly what your body needs: 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, 60 milligrams of magnesium, 0 sugar, and no junk. Personally, I like to mix half a pack with my morning oatmeal. I'll use any of the chocolate flavors. I drink it with all my training sessions, watermelon being my favorite. Some other reasons why I use it is stable energy with no crash. It fights off fatigue and cramps, improves mental focus and clarity, helps regulate stress and supports deeper sleep, and there's no sugar and garbage. Here's the best part. You can try it totally risk-free. Right now, Element is offering a free 8-count sample pack of its most popular flavors. With each purchase, you get 2 of each of these 4 fan favorites, perfect for finding your own favorite or sharing with a friend. Don't like it? Give it to a salty friend and Element will give you your money back. Head over to www.drinklmnt.com/table talk.
And it was my job to essentially work with her in all aspects of her training and her preparation. So 3 to 4 hours a day, I'd sit around and like grab balls on the court and just like pick them up for her as she worked with her tennis coach. And she'd be sitting there and these tiny little micro adjustments of her serve, which was like her big thing, were being worked with the coach. 200 reps in, they'd be changing 1 degree of, pronation on her serve, and it would make the biggest of difference. And she would lock into that. And then we'd find out, okay, well, let's go to lunch. Let's not eat Snickers bars a day. Let's get some quality protein in. And then we move on to the strength session of the day. And again, she's banged up here. She's banged up at her lower back. Her hips all fucked up. And she'd be going through her session like this. Be doing dumbbell press. What are we doing? On her phone between sets while I'm working with her. And it didn't click for her that her movement preparation and essentially her prehab work that we were doing with her strength and conditioning in the gym was meant to then transfer to her health and her performance on the court. And the number one thing that she needed more than anything else was to simply be healthy, just healthy enough so she could go in and compete at the Australian Open. She could go win that $1 million purse. She could go in and do the things of her dreams. But it didn't click to her that strength mattered, her training mattered, her prehab mattered, her physical therapy mattered. A movement mastery mindset there was going to transfer into higher performance on the court. And it just never clicked for her. So she would spend, instead of 3 hours, she'd spend 5 hours. Instead of 5 hours, to spend 6 hours on the court with her serve. But the mechanics and her health was never fixed in the gym. And this is very common amongst almost every single athlete that I've worked with. And it's extraordinarily common amongst just the general fitness population as well. They think that, hey, as long as I do this one thing, pickleball is the one thing that I need to do. As long as I can perform on pickleball, it doesn't matter what I do to prep for it. And it's something that is not just the strength athletes, it's almost every single athlete, because unless it's a squat, bench, and dead, why would we care about the movement quality in our accessory work or our primer work or our rehab or our training or recovery? It's really a difficult mindset shift to hit, but you have to be forced to make that difference, or you need to have mentors that bring you through and actually teach you that this shit matters.
No, I would say it's coaching, right? Because when you first asked the question, I'd say with the strength athletes, it's rage, right? It's just aggression. Right? They're just using the aggression to be able to move things. But if we were to contrast what you just said, if we tell that strength athlete, hey, look, it's probably a good idea for you to get 5,000, 6,000, 10,000 steps per day. When they go out and walk, do you think they're actually thinking about what their mechanics look like when they walk? They're just fucking walking because they were told that's what they have to do to be able to help the recovery.
Punching the clock.
That's the athlete with the strength and conditioning, which all these just boil back to the coach doing a shitty job of making the athlete understand that this is important, right? So you can't blame it on the athlete, right? Because if I'm told to do something, as you try to have me do some things, I don't want to do them, right? I don't give a fuck about doing them. But I was able to take, what I knew from the strength world and put it over here and say, well, I can do this with the right intent and get it done in half the period of time, or get it done with the wrong intent and make it take a longer period of time. But it has to be, you can't blame the athlete, right? Because the athlete cares about pickleball, or they care about the volleyball or tennis or whatever it is. And the strength athlete cares about their lifts. That's the number one thing. So they'll film every top set they do. We know this, right? They're going to film all of them and they're going to scrutinize all of them. But once they get fucked up, right? It's like, oh, I need to do some of this shit for my shoulder, right? And it's the coaching, right? Because that's the default. Because we only have so much bandwidth. That would be my answer there.
No, I suppose my question came from like your athlete example with the tennis serve. you know, for a power lifter, that tennis serve is your squat, bench, and deadlift,
Exactly.
right? But like, even in those things are your sport. Even within those, I still find that the attention to detail isn't quite there. Compared to like that person will serve for an hour and screw it, but someone will do a 2-hour squat session. Maybe there's 10 works, or there's dynamic effort work or whatever, and it's cool, I did it.
Or cool, I did it. I just need to do more of what I'm doing, and that's going to get me past this plateau. And that's a mistake as well. Instead of high amount of volume, we need high amount of quality work, and we go minimal effective dosages on this stuff. But it all comes down to the movement mastery mindset. And I think that people don't understand that as you start to master a specific movement or a specific lift or a specific exercise, a specific accessory or compound lift, then we can go, okay, we can put this on autopilot now. Now I have the motor control, I have the neural capacity to be able to master this, and then I can take one step right, one step left, and start to diversify now. Now we start to strengthen the entire system. But if we never actually master the one thing that we're doing, we're going to be bullshitting around for the next couple years, never getting what we need out of some of those movements. It doesn't have to be that way. But once we actually master something, the way we move becomes the way that we move, and we can lock in. But then we can start to peel the onion back little by little and have more movement diversity and actually strengthen some of the weaker links, as opposed to just going through the motions and maybe getting a little bit of benefit, but never getting maximal benefit, and then really eating into some of your recoverable volume.
Do you think a fundamental part of it is just kind of a mindset of quantity over quality in many ways?
There's
like you said there, that first thought will be, cool, I need to do more next time.
Yes.
The thought process is very rarely, I'll do the same thing but slightly better.
Yes.
Like that. So how do we get around that?
Well, keep in mind that if somebody's just starting strength training, they're rewarded for any work.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? Because
absolutely.
At least you're doing something.
Well, they're doing it and they're getting stronger.
Yeah.
Right. So anything that they do in the first 3 years, they're going to get stronger. Right. So that default's going to be whenever things slow down, as they will. Well, it's slowing down because I need to go back and do what I was doing before. Right. And that's the dichotomy that kind of plays out here is you were rewarded for all this shitty stuff. But was it shitty stuff because you're rewarded and you're at this place? But to get to that next place, it's a different thing. And that's true in anything in life, by the way, right? And the ones that are going to fall more on that genetic outlier scale never have to worry about any of this. You know, I've seen them. Like I've seen people break all-time world records that have no fucking idea what they're doing. They just have the mental fortitude to be able to do what they need to do to be able to do it. But they could be better. I mean, we would all agree on that. They could be leaves this interesting opportunity for those that aren't those outliers, you know, to be able to compete.
Yeah.
Maybe not be able to beat them, but to be able to compete on the same platform, because most of the time they're not doing everything they could do to become their best, or they're going to be out of the sport before they actually hit the pinnacle, right? To where that other person could close that gap if they're doing things right. And that's the majority, by the way. Yeah. Because most people are not these outliers.
Yeah. That's a really hard sell, though, isn't it? Like,
it is.
Yeah. See that person who's number one in the world? That's in spite of what they're doing rather than because of. If you did this different to them, you'd actually be better. Like, it's a hard sell, isn't it? Like, it's hard to prove, but I suppose it's a good question for you. Like, when you go through this intake process and you teach this bracing, this neutral spine, this movement quality approach, do you find that the need for training volume comes down? And how quick do you find that the results are? Because you presume that the average person is going to, if they start integrating these practices well, they shouldn't need much convincing. Do you know what I mean? It could be one session, you're like, I get it.
Yeah, people will lock in with the result basis. So the result basis will be a long-term result, like, hey, I'm getting stronger, I'm getting bigger, my conditioning capacity is up, or they're just simply feeling better. I don't care who you are. If you're feeling like shit and something has a hand in making you feel even a little bit better, and specifically, if you can feel better because of your training that day, that is empowering. And that is going to stack those wins over and over and over again to have you make a behavioral change and a cognitive behavioral change where you're willing to go in and buy into a new system. I think that we have not a great understanding of how bad people are feeling on a daily basis. I'm not just talking about powerlifters here. I'm not just talking about my athletes here. I'm working with day-to-day average people that are feeling like absolute shit. You know, they're not sleeping, they're eating like crap, and then the only thing that they have in their lives is going into the gym and pounding themselves for 2 hours into the ground. They're already redlining their lifestyle, but then they're going, you know what? All I have left is this workout. Everything else is shit in my life. I'm going to pound this workout. And these are the ones that are most at risk for really losing their physical practices. But I think that if you can get somebody feeling better on a daily basis, I think that alone with pain-free performance training has been the aha for many people. You know, people ask me like, why did this pick up? Why did this get so popular? How do you have so many people moving through this educational system? Is because the shit will work, but also it will make somebody feel better almost on the first day. And when you can feel better after feeling like shit, you're going to want more of that. You know, it's a very rare person that's just an absolute sadist that wants to go in and be a martyr and just live a shitty life. Everyone wants to live a good life. And I think that the gym can play a role in improving your life. But many times when we get into these deep, dark holes, it takes away from our quality of life. And that's not for everyone, and it shouldn't be for everybody. We should all have the goal of being able to have this as a net positive to what we're doing as a husband, as a father, as a community member, as a business owner, whatever it is on your daily basis. But when you can feel good, that's a feeling that I want to feel. And that's something that I'm going to stick with 7 days a week. And that's something that I have stuck with 7 days a week personally, because I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be who I was without having training being a positive aspect of my life.
They may not know. So how can I explain this? If we have an addict, right, and they're high all the time, and then they go through the clean out phase, right? And after that week of throwing up whatever they have to do, then they're going to be in a position where they don't feel high, right? They feel normal. Then they can make a decision, and addiction's a different type of thing, but they can make a decision. Do I want to pursue this, or do I just want to stay high all the time? And the difference in the analogy I'm making here is they can know like within a week, right? But if somebody's been to a point to where you don't just go from feeling good to feeling like shit unless you're sick. You know, you just slowly get accustomed. Like here's where I felt really good. Now I'm at a 9, but after a year at a 9, the 9 is now my new 10.
Exactly.
Right. And then that just degrades down into now it's here, this 3. Right. And so you would ask, how do you feel? I feel fucking good. And then you start peeling the layers. Well, move this. What's that feel like? Well, that fucking hurts. Right. So actually you don't feel good. Right. But to get to that point to where they feel good, they can go up, you know, a chip, but they're not going to know what it really feels like to feel good, I guess, in my opinion, unless they go through a phase, you know, like a 3-month training block or whatever, just to kind of restore all those qualities. And you're like, oh my God, I feel great. I'm weak as fuck, but I feel great, you know, because that's in there. So I think a lot of it is just people become accustomed. So like this is, and age will play in there too. Like, well, I'm going to feel worse because now I'm fucking 50 or now I'm 40 or whatever it's going to be. And they just accept that. Right. So they don't know unless they go through. Does that make sense?
No, okay. So like this cycles back to all the topics really, but like let's say, take the movement mastery one as an example. Like when you're showing someone like a deadlift, should we say correctly, whatever, do you think a lot of the time is a lack of awareness of how good that movement could feel? Like, you know, we've experienced this ourselves. Like I didn't know I could do a split squat and my knees not hurt, or I could do a deadlift workout and my back not hurt. Like people aren't even aware that like there's this whole realm in front of you that you could explore where like these things don't have to be this stressful. They just think, well, I lift and these things hurt and lifting's hard, so that's fine. You know what I mean? Like how much of it needs to be opening people's perceptions so these things can be done in ways where that is not normal.
That's the business that I'm in. is that we can train, and when you can show somebody that they can elicit a very similar training effect without eliciting a pain response, that's like, whoa, okay. And many times it comes from just us being dogmatic fucking meatheads. It's like, I must squat like this because Dave Tate squats like this. But you're not Dave Tate. You're not the same body. You're not the same shape. You're not the same size. You don't have the same hips. You know, you have to be able to train for your own body. And I think many times the way that people are, you know, really thinking that strength training should be painful is because they're trying to shove themselves into a mismatch to what their body actually needs, not just from performance, but just from their movement. You know, in terms of movement individualization and optimization, every single person is going to move differently in their most optimal way. And I think that's an exploration process that doesn't have to be this crazy journey. This is something that we can get some really quick hitting data on. We can look at limb lengths. We can look at your torso length. We can look at your anthropometry. We can look at all these different variables and essentially put you into a position to have more success. And success for me is, hey, this didn't hurt, but also this feels like it may over time, as I callous the system with load, be strong, stable, and actually improve my performance. But I think that we so many times force feed specific exercises, specific setups, specific execution styles, because we look at somebody else's body and we forget that we need to be moving for our body, not theirs.
Sure. So when you're looking at those various, I mean, you mentioned the anthropometry and the body proportion of, assuming someone is not going to do your course or, you know, whatever, what are the indicators you're looking at like those, and what do they tell you? Like when you measure them, obviously you get this information like legs are this long or whatever, hip structure is this. What's the actionable things that you take away from that? Just a few examples so people can get an idea of how you're varying things based on those results.
Yeah, the squat is going to be the sexiest one. We run something called the hip quadrant test. People can actually do it on themselves. And this allows us to look at the shape, the size, and the angulation of the hip, the ball and socket base joint. And this allows us to see what is your terminal squat depth out of your, not a competition squat position, but your squat movement pattern that you could take a shit in a hole in. And then you look at where your heels are relative, where your foot abduction angle is right and left, where your knee to knee angle is at terminal depth, but also where your torso angle may be as well. And all of a sudden you can stand somebody up and go, hey, you've been wide stance squatting and your hips are killing you. You were naturally God-given a really nice narrow stance with more of a foot abduction angle. Let's make sure that we can have that in your arsenal, and maybe let's just have a little bit more of an open mind on where we get maximal loading from in your competition squat. So the squat is a really big one based on the hip anthropometry. You know, the same thing could be set up at the shoulders as well. You know, the shoulders are really, really complicated. They call it the shoulder complex for a reason, but it's not just this glenohumeral ball and socket joint. You have 5 different aspects of the shoulder complex that really need to be working in integration with one another. You know, it's really a combination from an anthropometrical perspective of what is the type of shoulder joint that you have at the glenohumeral joint, and then how does the rest of the joints actually interact to be able to create extension, rotation, and side bending of the thoracic spine and the scapula to be able to open up this thing for performance. And we can do that very quickly by a T-spine rotation test to be able to see what kind of capacity that we have to move there, but also something called a shoulder scour is essentially where we should find neutrality, where we should find centration at the shoulder, and where we can get maximal range of motion while maintaining that centration. More range of motion under load builds up the capacity of that pattern specifically. And that is just a position that people are mismatched from. I'll see people pressing from here. It's like, yeah, no shit, your shoulders hurt. They should be here. About 50% of people will fall within 45 to 60 degrees of a humeral carrying angle. That is going to be your average. But the craziest thing about the hips and the shoulders is that not only are different people different in terms of the anthropometry of these ball and socket joints, but they're different right to left as well based on chronic stresses or just based on the way that your bony anatomy had developed. We're seeing that shoulders specifically have 50 to 60% differentiation right to left when we have really high amounts of stress placed on the shoulder joint and prepubescent ages. You know, I look at my son Cam, there was games this year, he was throwing 120 pitches in baseball as a left-handed pitcher. And I'm sitting there as a dad like, what the fuck is happening? But you're talking about that. He's like 5 years away from puberty and he's putting a huge amount of stress on his left shoulder, his throwing arm. And that is going to change the bony anatomy there. And then he's going to end up being a 30-year-old dude wondering why, oh man, the straight bar really sucks for me on barbell bench press and I just can't seem to get it and it always hurts my shoulder. the body is different. The body morphs and it evolves. And I think that we have to have a better appreciation for not everything being perfectly symmetrical, not everything being perfectly stripped at our foot position or our hand positions in any of the big basic movements.
So how do you, let's assume let's take a powerlifter because it's a super easy example, right? Who has those issues, right? How do you, they have to lift a straight barbell with some proficiency. It's their sport, right? So I presume we're not going to say like bench with your arm out here and the other one in here. So that's a given. So how do you work around that the rest of the time so that they can perform well in a movement that we know is stressful for them and isn't optimal, but that's their sport? What do you do the rest of the time then to work around that? Because I'm presuming what you're talking about there is quite common.
It's not as common as you'd think. You know, like there's not a whole lot of kids out there before the age of 13 or 14 with huge chronic stresses. We're seeing it in tennis athletes. We're seeing it in baseball players predominantly. And those are the types of volumes that you would get, like a morphological change at your joint pre-pubescent. Okay. But everyone else, like we're dealing with maybe like 5 to 15% difference. Okay. If you can be under 15% different right to left, you're going to be cool symmetrically pressing or squatting or doing those types of things. So I use that example as like, hey, we're seeing some crazy things because the body is amazing, but a vast majority of the people, they can lock into a symmetrical hand or foot position and do actually pretty well. But to your question, I do get these. I had a power lifter come in to work with me. He was an ex-professional baseball player. He was a pitcher and an outfielder. He played both positions professionally. And his shoulder was 72% different on his right throwing arm than it was on his left. And he was wondering why his bench sucked. Oh man, I'm just dealing with an old shoulder injury from baseball. No, you're not, man. You're just force feeding too high of a frequency into a specific barbell lift, and you never actually built up all the other capacities around the shoulder complex to withstand the stress that we actually need to put on the body in that sport-specific position. For somebody like that, we're going to be doing a whole lot of accessory work in open chain pressing with dumbbells, with kettlebells at different angles to be able to find that centrated moment to free up the degrees of freedom. We're also going to be getting his hands on the ground and being able to have the scaps start to interact and be able to dynamically stabilize on the body. And we're going to most likely be using a myriad of different hand positions when it comes to bar pressing as well. And somebody like that, I would be using like a 7 to 8 month like off season where we're really barely pressing a barbell conventionally with their sport specific position.
Dave Tate here from Elite FTS to talk to you about bands. We've been a supplier of bands for almost 2 decades now. So I've known my way around the band landscape. When I'm talking about bands, I'm talking about floss bands, long bands, short bands, bands you can use for resistance training, mobility training, body weight training, and flossing. One of our most popular bands, or actually our most popular bands, are the long bands. The long bands are typically used the most with squats, bench presses. Our floss bands are bands that you wrap around the joint to be able to help with mobility, circulation. And the short bands are designed for shorter range movements, bench press, deadlifts, and a lot of times people will use them with resistance machines to help accommodate the strength resistance curve. Head over to elitefts.com and look for bands in the toolbar or blowout menu.
And I would be trying to get them as healthy as possible, knowing very well that you would go into your preseason prep and then you go into your competition season and you have to go back in and get those positions. But the barbell is interesting for bench pressing because it's not actually a full range of motion lift. The bar is going to hit your chest. There's different ways to manipulate your arch and be able to manipulate your upper back position on the bench. We can get around that more than almost squat or bench or squat or deadlift. Those tend to be the most difficult ones in terms of being able to battle some of these anthropometric issues. The bench press usually is something that is manageable.
Sure. The reason I ask that is I know there's not going to be a lot of like bony skeletal imbalances that are huge, but the average person is probably going to come to you with a shoulder that's here because like this is the hand that they type with or their mouse, right?
Yeah.
They've probably got one hip that's sitting lower or higher because every time they stand, they have a dominant leg that they lean on. And sure, you probably don't need a 7 or 8 month off period to fix those things, right? But there's probably at least a month or two there where you're like, okay, that's not a problem now, but it could be if we just keep doing this bilateral even stuff. So would the tactic still be the same there? It would just be shorter lived?
I think so. And that is the big equalizer that I've seen across every sport today, is that our daily postures and positions fucking suck. And it's because of our lifestyle. I am guilty We're all guilty. I saw you on the treadmill on your phone before we came in on this podcast. And I've done exactly the same thing 4 days a week to get my work in. But we're living in this predominant position more than ever before. And every single year that passes, a study will be shown, we spend 6 hours on the phone in 2023. It's up to 7 hours in 2024. It's up to 8 hours in 2025. It's getting to the point where this is the number one thing that I start to work on, is trying to distribute training volume based on trying to rebuild people's postures just so they can go out and perform in their goals. And this is totally different than what I would do 10 years ago or when I started 20 years ago. It's like, we didn't have an iPhone barely 20 years ago. And today it's like, man, everyone is glued to this thing, or they're glued to their car and their commutes, they're glued to their computers, and we're seated at 90-degree angles. And this is something that I think that we have kind of pushed under the rug for far too long. But I've seen that this is going to be the big equalizer. This was like a holy shit moment for me, where I was working with an NBA athlete, and we were doing all our strength training. We had a really nice training session, well-rounded, adaptable approach in an off season. And then we get on the table and we do some physical therapy after his strength training. And all of a sudden he was like really engaged in the session. He gets out on the table and we're working on his feet. We're working on his feet, some isometric shit like that. And he's laying there like this on his phone for 45 minutes. And I was thinking to myself, that entire hour-long session that we just got out of just got negated by me working on his acute weak links at his feet right now with isometric positions, just based on the position that he's in on this phone. But he's on that position on his phone all day long, and everybody else is as well. I think that's something that we need to take into account. It's just not textbook what lifts people need or how we distribute the volume in terms of which patterns need to be hit. But what does your daily life look like if you're a power lifter? If you are a bodybuilder, if you just want to lose 20 pounds and get in the gym and get active, I'm looking at your daily positions, and usually the first number of training blocks, usually 12 to 16 weeks, is going to be highly predominant in trying to build back that posterior chain, being able to get you back into extension, external rotation, abduction, and essentially build muscle armor to hold you there so we can then perform on the front side.
If everyone's pretty well-versed on the whole kyphotic posture and what you're saying there with, I presume, a lot of pulling work, etc., will probably resonate very much with people there. But when you're then dealing with the anterior pelvic tilt side of that, everyone has both pretty much, right, to some degree. What does that initial block look like there? Because everyone can easily think, well, I just need to pull more. But what are you putting in to try and correct that pelvic lower back position? Because, otherwise you're just adding load to a position that's probably not going to be great long term.
Interestingly enough, the anterior pelvic tilt position is not something that I really work acutely on. That's something that I do see that they have faulty bracing mechanics and breathing mechanics, and it pulls them into that position, especially as they move. And as they move without quality bracing and either a reactionary brace or a premeditated brace, that is their default position. But we tend to not really have a focal point on that. And we tend to actually try to rebuild it based on different positions that we would just automatically be hitting on the posterior chain anyways. Top-down RDLs are going to be big. Hamstring and direct glute work is going to be big. And anything that actually is working into extension at the lower back with a stable pelvis, things like back extension or GHR. So those things are really something that will automatically be built in. But I can't tell you in the last number of years that I've had somebody come into me and be like, wow, that anterior pelvic tilt is the reason that your lower back hurts, or that anterior pelvic tilt is the reason that your posture sucks. Very rarely is it that. But I think the stresses of the shoulder specifically, because we have the big equalizer at the shoulder, which is the shoulder blade, it can't be looked at the shoulders equal to the hips. We don't have a scap on our ass. The scap is the thing that really is the biggest potentiator, but it's the thing that can actually pull back from our performance the most. So that's from a postural perspective. We really look at the upper body directing that, and then just the volume distribution at the lower body really taking care of things, especially at the lumbopelvic complex.
So if it's not the anterior pelvic tilt, what is it? Like you said, it's often not the cause of the lower back pain, right? And I'm sure there's multifactorial answer to this, but if it's not that, because that's the easy, like, pin the tail on the donkey thing, like, oh, it must be that, you can see it, right? If it's not that, then a lot of the times, what are the underlying mechanisms that are causing these things?
People get mad at me when I say this one, but I've been saying it for a number of years now, and I truly believe in it, is that people have weak lower backs. They have weak posterior chains, and you can simply look that they don't have the muscle armor to be able to protect themselves. And when you think about that, we're trying to build the erector group, we're trying to build the glutes, we're trying to build the hamstrings. We're trying to have all three of those things work together and in the same firing pattern, or the correct firing pattern. We want the glutes, the hamstrings, the erectors to be able to hit. If you want to be able to isolate out those, that's fine as well. But that integration of the posterior actually moving into extension properly is the skill that many of those people are missing. But I think that people ended up needing to be stronger in their posterior, and they need to be stronger at their lower back. A stronger spine is going to stand the test of time. And that doesn't have to do with like marked acute pain issues or huge injury issues that just happen. I'm talking about the general person that has lower back pain for the last 10 years. It's always been a pain in the ass for them, and they kind of just be able to get through their training. I think those people just need to really hit the posterior a lot harder, and they just need to go in and strengthen the weak link.
I think that's probably more important than the being on the phone thing. Because when I hear the being on the phone thing or the computer thing, I don't necessarily buy that, because if we go back, you can make the same argument that people were sitting at desks or working a factory line hunched over all day. Go back further, cavemen were sitting around fires, all the time, except for when they had to go hunt and all this other kind of stuff. So if we look at what's really different, we're heavier, right? We're fatter, right? Which is going to pull the body forward, which requires a stronger lower back, right? We're not going for walks. There's other movement that's been reduced over the time period, but I don't know how much of it's because of this hunching over thing, because we've been doing that as a species since being a species, right?
It's an interesting one, though, because the way in which we're interacting with handheld technologies is totally different than just seated at a desk or sitting at a campfire. Because of the way that we're interacting with a phone that is anywhere from 6 to 12 inches away from our face, it actually brings the most important thing, which is your head towards the phone. You're going to interact with the phone, and most people aren't going to go like this. They're going to go like this. And just using an example, we had, so Lala does, 10 hours of virtual coaching every single day, and she was using a phone, and every single time that she would go in, she has like the iPhone Pro or whatever, it wasn't big enough, and every time she would go in to give a coaching cue, this is her position every single time. You do that for 10 hours a day, you can withstand the first year, you can withstand the first 2 years. 5 years in, I was like, holy shit, there is something here. We're changing all of our training volumes, we're doing our exercise selection differently, we're doing her postural restoration drills and her rehab and her recovery on off days. And the number one thing that helped her was getting a bigger screen, actually putting it into a place where she didn't react to the phone in front of her. And we had a big screen up there, and it was never an issue since. So we're chasing all these different things. But I think the way that we go in and we interact, the head will lead the rest of the body. And that is the biggest difference between having something in front of your face where you're reacting to it, because that's the things that we're doing. We're going like this, as opposed to actually bringing it to us. Nobody brings anything to us. We bring ourselves to the thing. So I think that the phone is probably the biggest culprit. You could argue that the computer is maybe secondary, but we've had computers now for 30 plus years. And I think that people have been seated for a long time, but we are inactive. We are not getting the movement. We are sicker, fatter, and more out of shape than ever before. And all that stuff is going to bring us into an anterior focus approach with our daily lifestyles. So I think it's not one factor, it's multifactorial, but there is nothing healthy about having that phone out. And since the book has come out, I found myself on my phone an additional 2 hours per day. And it has not been good on my body. And I spend all day on the computer and coaching clients and doing all that stuff anyways for the last 10 years. But that specific phone work, because Instagram's on the phone and YouTube's on the phone, that was a big change even in the last 2 months with myself, knowing very well that I need to be able to do something different. But that was like the one new factor into my lifestyle that I didn't expect, but it's actually taken a toll. It's difficult.
So how do you mitigate that without having, because you have to do it, right? You have to do, you know what I'm saying? You have to do the work. Right? We can tell people, now a lot of people are just leisurely I get that. But some people are not. It's part of their work. So then how do you mitigate it?
So the things that I'll particularly focus on for my own training is that I'll always keep in 2 things every single day, no matter if I have a cardio and conditioning day, whether I have an upper body directed day, lower body directed day, or a full body day. I'll be doing thoracic spine rotations and extensions every single day. And I'll be doing those multiple times a day to be able to retract, to be able to rotate and side bend the thoracic spine, moving that entire shoulder complex. I'll do as many of those as humanly possible. On lower body days, I'll do it out of the adductor rock. On upper body days, I'll be doing it out of just a more isolated lower body with a more dynamic upper body, but that one will stay in always. And then the second one will be isolated band work. Isolated band work to be able to do pull aparts and face pulls. I'll do those throughout my daily positions, and there'll be something every single day that I'll do probably 3, 4, 5 times a day. And this is something I practice what I preach as well, because it's not just me and it's not just us dealing with this stuff. I'm working with CEOs, I'm working with business people, I'm working with professional athletes that are having to do this because, again, they're on their social media, they're getting back to their fans or whatever, or they're just on business deals. And we have a rule that every waking hour, you should be able to stand up, squeeze your ass, be able to squeeze your upper back with a face pull or pull apart, and get in 1 minute of quality postural restoration work with every waking hour. That is a game changer, because we can't just go, get off of Instagram. Hey, don't call your wife on the way home because it's using your phone and you have it on lock mode. That's not going to be part of it. We just need to be able to plan for it. And it's not just your training, and it's not just your training and your warm-ups, and it's not just your training, warm-ups, and cool down. It's about the other things that you can build into your days that are super easy and effective. You can do that if you work 8 hours a day. You can get 800 reps of face pulls in with a tiny micro band, and you can get your ass squeezed and you can actually reset your position. There's nothing wrong with these piss poor postural positions throughout the day, but there's something wrong if we don't actively reverse them, and if we don't get in the habit of doing that and be able to have a reset on our movement system.
I got to ask, since you mentioned the pull aparts there, and it sounds a really dumb question, but it's not. What are people doing wrong with them? Because it's one of the most simple and probably one of the most butchered exercises.
Before you answer, let me back up what he just said. I've had people that I've literally said, just fucking stop doing them. Because it's a disaster. It's like, well, I've been doing them for 4 years, and it doesn't work. I'm like, we do. So
not when you do.
There's a lot of context behind this one.
You ever have somebody come in and try to PR their pull apart?
Not yet.
They use the gray band and they want to show you how strong they are, just doing a pull apart for 2 reps. And they think that is the thing that's going to help their shoulder pain. And ends up something like this. That's not what you want to do. I will use the lightest band that you have. So it's usually your orange micros. That's the one that I will use, because a little bit goes a long way. It's not about getting strong in that position. It's about having a little bit of tension on the system to be able to get up strong and stable into extension plus downward rotation, retraction, and depression of the shoulder blade. That is the key. But the number one mistake that people will make will be their positions of their feet and their legs and their hips and their spine. They act like it's just the shoulder thing, and they just end up doing this, as opposed to, hey, we need to lock down the thing that's contacting the ground first, because we need to be posturally stable all the way up the chain, from the ground all the way up into the moving dynamic areas. So that's the first thing. Breathing, bracing, being able to have postural control. That is step 1. Step 2, I like this one because this is a mistake I see. People will go double pronated and end up going into pronation, and that will cause an elevation of the shoulder and actually upward rotation of the shoulder blade. That's exactly the opposite of what we want. And then I'll see this one. I hate this one. People will go into full supination. Even doing it right here feels like absolute shit to me. Full supination is garbage as well. Why are we doing the pull apart in the first place? Postural restoration. Okay, postural restoration. The shoulder is not a sagittal plane joint. The shoulder is thriving on rotation. So when we teach the pull apart, we want to start with about 12 inches between the hands. We never want a saggy, sad band. So always keep it on slight tension. And we're starting with double pronation. And as we go out, we're actually rotating externally 90 degrees. And that is going to allow the shoulder blades to go into full downward rotation. And as we come back up, it's going to go into full upward rotation. And then we have the degrees of rotation happening at the shoulder blade. And that is the reason why you're doing the pull apart itself. So you'll start up at eye level, 12 inches apart, pronation. You'll pull it down to about nipple height, where the band is hitting you at nipple height at the chest. So you're going to have depression plus external rotation, and then you're going to come back up and through. That is going to be huge. If you can do that, you're going to be 99% of the way there. The last one is I'll actually have slight extension at the spine, and I'll work on retracting as I go through. So I'll retract, come back, retract, and come back. And then all of a sudden, you can get a couple reps in there in a matter of a minute that could be better than thousands of reps that you would be doing in your last couple weeks of training, just like garbage.
Is there an argument, you say 90-degree rotation here, right? What is the problem with going into supination? Because the argument will be made, I spend all day here. So the argument will be, well, naturally, I want to spend time here because that's the opposite, right? Because most people probably can't get there to start with anyway. So what is the problem with that back here that you don't like?
There's no problem with it back here. It's starting here and ending here. It's the relative change of angle. Yeah. So we want to actually be dynamically moving into external rotation. So that's the magic pill for shoulder health, is if we can have our pulling patterns go from internal rotation to external rotation. That relative external rotation is what we're after. Yeah. If we're starting at external rotation, ending at external rotation, the relative rotation is 0.
Yeah, sure. So it's the idea just that, I mean, you think of a punch or anything like that.
Exactly.
So you're just trying to mimic that kind of movement, but with a band pull apart.
Well, that's, you tear back our skin. That's the way that our bioanatomy was built. It's all synergistic spiral planes. Nothing is in a straight plane. So in order for us to get the most out of our pulling pattern, it must have degrees of rotation. Rotation at the hand, rotation at the elbow, rotation at the shoulder, and the thoracic cage. That is the perfect pull pattern. That's something that I deep dive into in the book, and people are like, holy shit, and that makes a huge difference. Because over the years, like, people will watch me do rows and they'll be like, you're rowing wrong. Not necessarily. And then I'll have high performance coaches from like the NFL be like, this is exactly how we do it. Well, why do you do it that way? It's because in a single arm specifically, and with the ability to have maximal amount of actual external rotation that is net positive, we can get the ability to target the entire pull pattern. The entire pull pattern needs to integrate the entire upper body with a stable lower body. And we really like with asymmetrical lower body stances as well. But we can't just go, hey, rows are really going to help me save my shoulder health and never break out of the rotational planes. We need to be able to reach, we need to be able to pull, we need to be able to integrate and use the amount of tension and irradiation that we have at our hands to be able to actually like link up this entire kinematic chain. I think that's what a lot of people are missing. They'll go, oh, well, John says to pull 3 times as much as I push in total volume throughout the week, and then end up doing these bullshit rows. And you're like, that's not equal to be able to actually row or be able to pull in a pattern that integrates the entire movement system. I think there's a big difference between just going through the motions in terms of execution of movement, or just trying to say like, hey, this is going to be equal to that. Highest quality of movement is going to be the most functional. It's going to be the thing that feels and functions the best, that creates the most torque and tension, and the thing that you can really see being able to transfer into a real movement skill.
So trying to put my mindset into someone who's listening to that now and takes that statement way too far, right? Why would I not do every single pull like on a cable with like a D handle that goes through? There's got to be a reason that maybe you wouldn't do every single pulling exercise that way. Yeah.
So as you get into more of like the upper end ranges of reps, so as soon as we get out of like that strength scheme, so 6 to 8 is going to be gold for just like base strength development. And it can have a lot of different impacts in terms of building muscle and building strength. I like to go hard and heavy. And if the goal is pure strength, then you're going to want to minimize rotation while keeping natural rotation into that minimum, just so you can move maximal amounts of load. Now, as you get into maybe the 8 to 15 rep range, we call it the functional hypertrophy rep range, that's when we can have not the external load be the dictator of the quality of the set, but actually the movement quality and the competency in the executional style, being able to target a bunch of different things in that key pattern. So that's the time and place where we want to have that mind-muscle movement connection high, and most likely the load is going to be a little bit lower, even though we want to be going and hitting a technical form failure. But that's the time where you really want to work into some of your accessories where load is not the key, movement quality is the key. The feel and the function of the mind-muscle movement connection is high. That's the time where you want to use a lot of rotation. And I think that people will go one or the other in terms of the direction, and neither ones are right. Hey, we'll just do sagittal plane lifting because that's where I can get maximal load. Or, you know what, we'll do all rotation. I'm going to give up the weights altogether. I'm going to be using an Indian club and a steel mace, and that's all I need to get strong.
Sure.
Like the middle path is the one that gets the best result.
You mentioned specifically with the pull there and the rotation, single arm.
Yes.
So there's a downside to bilateral, both at the same time? And what would that be?
Yeah, so we will combine bilateral and unilateral pulling, but we will have probably twice as much volume on unilateral. The big key for unilateral is that we're able to use the opposite arm in a way that actually has the opposite position at the shoulder blade and at the thoracic spine. So as we go out into the pull pattern, we are going to be bringing this scap into upward rotation and protraction. The opposite scap isn't just sitting there doing nothing. It's actually coming into retraction and downward rotation. It's a combination of how we can actually create the synergy between the two sides in opposite directions. That's where we get that linkage that we're actually looking for. So anytime that we can do unilateral based rowing, it does three different things for us. One, it allows us to naturally rotate and actually get a maximal amount of range of motion throughout the thoracic spine. It allows us to be able to cross tension our core and be able to have some core recruitment of hips going up into the shoulder, which is really, really an important thing when it comes to just motor skill development. And it also allows us to have higher amounts of overall mind-muscle movement connection. I'm not saying mind-muscle connection. Mind-muscle movement connection means that you have an integration of a feel, everything from your forearm all the way up into your shoulders, all the way up into the lats leading as the primary mover. So if we can actually integrate and feel all of those key muscles moving in the pattern, that is what we're looking for. So more core, more range of motion, and more functionality if we can get unilateral versus bilateral. Where we will go into the bilateral is where we sit into like that 6 to 8 or maybe 6 to 10 rep range, where that is going to be like our first accessory movement that is going to be strength emphasized. And we just want to move a whole lot of load, and we want to place that as the system as the key of that exercise.
How do you approach that paradigm with pressing movements?
Pressing movements is
because it's very hard to do a press like this, right? So or more difficult at least. So how do you cross that issue there?
Well, why is it more difficult?
Well, that's a great, people would assume, I assumed. So I'm going to...
Well, it's more difficult because you're laying on it between you and the bench.
Sure.
So as soon as you have 200 pounds laying back down on your scaps and you're pinning it between that and your elite bench, it's going to be very hard to have that same dynamic.
There was also an assumption of a horizontal press made there though too.
Exactly. Okay. So the horizontal press, people will hear press and they'll be like,
sure. No, I agree. Press. It's just interesting, right? Because we know that's not right, but we still do it anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we are able to free our shoulder blade as soon as we get above 45 degrees above a parallel to the ground. This is where we start to integrate the ability to move the shoulder blade. We do a whole lot of single arm pressing with the dumbbell and the kettlebell. We're able to actually rotate. We're able to protract and elevate and get a full range of motion and an excursion from that entire complex there. And that's something that not a whole lot of people are doing. It's either horizontal pressing. If you're super functional, you go to 45 degrees and press in the open chain. And then, hey, if you want to really be a strength athlete, then you need to barbell overhead press as well. But as soon as you lock into a bar, especially going up overhead, we lose the ability to utilize the rotation that we naturally have. And I'm not against barbell overhead pressing. We sprinkle it into the programs, but usually we'll use it as a key performance indicator, 1 to 6 reps, and we want to have high strength capacity with that. Everything else is going to be dumbbell and kettlebell and cable and band, just to play with the rotation of the shoulder that it naturally has.
Sure. So there needs to be, in the same way there needs to be some element of rotational pulling, there needs to be some element of rotational pressing for you as well.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. And a little bit goes a long way, especially on pressing. You'll have more freedom with the pull because it will feel more natural to you. But when it comes to pressing, just like 5 to 10 degrees of relative motion moving into internal and external rotation at the shoulder and varying degrees of humeral carrying angle, that's what we call this angle here to here, that really goes a long way to mitigating the risk of front-sided shoulder stress and closing down this window, and allows us to get into deeper ranges of motion and better mind-muscle connection.
In that context, like, you know, the average person is going to be very much tied to like the bench press or a barbell or whatever. So if you had to pick one, would you say that rotational overhead is going to be more beneficial just because there's more range and there's more rotation they travel through compared to like a horizontal version?
Yeah, the cool thing about single arm rotational overhead pressing is that you don't necessarily have to have full range of motion bilaterally getting your arms up overhead at 175 to 180 degrees. As soon as we actually play with the natural asymmetries of the body, I like the half kneeling position down on the ground, and that kneeling side having the press up this way, you're allowing yourself to actually utilize your thoracic spine and also the lower body to actually play with your asymmetries to get you into a full range of motion. But the things that I like in accessory to a horizontal bar press is that we got to be working in push-ups. We got to be getting our hands on the ground, closed kinematic chain, making those shoulder blades work. There's nothing super awesome about doing push-ups, but keeping them in your arsenal regularly will help with long-term shoulder health. You know, the second one that I like is being able to go slight angle in terms of, we don't always go pure overhead pressing, but anything that is sitting within that 45-degree window of being able to use a dumbbell or kettlebell bands and cables up overhead, utilizing that usually in higher end rep schemes. You're not going to set a 1 RM doing this, but we're going to sit that anywhere from probably like 15 to 25 as metabolic burners at the tail end of training sessions.
So to ask a similar question to what I did earlier, because I think it's relevant, you mentioned push-ups being important for shoulder health there. How is everyone messing those up? Because there's plenty of people doing band pull-aparts and not helping their shoulders and actually maybe making them worse. There's probably a whole bunch of people who will listen to this, go and do push-ups and make their shoulders worse, right? Because they're going to be locked into the same pattern they use laying on the bench and the bars in their hand. So what I get, the push-up is different. We all kind of understand that. But mechanistically, when you're having someone perform it, what is different compared to like, oh, but this is how I press a thing, right? What are they approaching it differently to actually get that benefit?
Okay. The setup is extremely important. We need to not just set up in the push-up position or the tall plank position. I set people up into a quadruped all fours position. At that point in time, I want them to get into their normal humeral carrying angle for them. So usually it's about 45 degrees for people. But all of a sudden, people put their hands on the ground, they end up being like this. Very rarely will we have hands on the ground with our push-ups. We will put something under their hands to do two things: to be able to normalize the humeral carrying angle, to put them into the slot where they're going to have joint centration, but also to make the push-up a full range of motion pushing pattern. As soon as you do a push-up, the floor is going to hit your chest before you can actually have a full range of motion happening. So we'll use kettlebells and have the kettlebells on your hands like this, and it feels really good. It takes the stress off of the wrists, the stress off the hands. More
so
range
your
of
hand
motion.
is on the body, not the handle, right?
Yeah.
Before someone's like, oh, I busted my teeth.
So the front part of the kettlebell, it's usually on one side of the kettlebells. Put those on the ground so they're not sliding around. And then you're able to use usually like an 8 to 12 will fit somebody's hand. And it'll give you 3 to 4 inches of increased range of motion that will get your chest down to the ground with authentic range, full range. That's really nice. But also the hands, you're able to grip from this position, and that's going to allow you to actually pull into the position with your humeral carrying angle. So that's a setup. But out of the quadruped position, we like to set up just like you are going to be doing a max effort lift, especially when you want to integrate the feet at the ground, the hands on the kettlebell or dumbbells, and then you being able to have a strong and stable pillar complex. So we'll be in quadruped position. We'll reach back with one leg. We'll reach back with both legs. We'll breathe, brace from there, and then dial down the brace and be able to go into the dynamic segment of the push-up pattern. So I think the setup of not just like going down to the ground and just getting the reps in, that's really big. We get it to the point where we will progress and utilize probably one every 3 to 4 training blocks. We'll use a push-up as a key performance indicator. Lala was just training in here on one of our programs today, and she had a 5x5 with loaded push-ups with, she used the blocks for the hand elevation, but she had 60 pounds of chains on her back hitting 5, at 115 pounds. So I like that as a functional strength challenge, but not all the time. A loaded push-up isn't going to be equal to a 315 pound bench press. But I think that keeping the arsenal in there, I think as soon as you add load to the system at a super high level, we're able to actually have your form and your focus and your technique level up to what is needed to actually perform. We've been known for for taking like pseudo physical therapy exercises and loading them super crazy to the point where people are like, holy shit, that's actually pretty impressive. You know, taking something like a goblet squat. Oh, you do that with a 20-pound dumbbell if you can't squat and you're a piece of shit. No, we'll take it with a 180, 200-pound dumbbell. We'll hit sets of 25 or 30 with it. And all of a sudden you're like, wow, that elicited a super crazy full body training effect. Bulgarian split squat is exactly the same thing we do with that. The push-ups I really like with that. Inverted rows I really like with those. And these are super base of the pyramid progression plays that we can add a huge amount of load to. But I think that people don't necessarily respect the basic exercises. But in my experience, the stronger and the more capable somebody gets, the harder they get hit when they go back to those basics if they actually load them.
You made a statement there, the push-up's not going to be equivalent to a 315 bench press.
No, but what you just said is true as fuck.
Oh yeah, it's very
true. The stronger you get, the worse you get on.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I'm just curious, what's the reasoning behind it? If I'm an athlete that doesn't have to lift a barbell, why would a loaded push-up potentially not? Is it just a logistical thing because of the loading? Or, okay, because, you know, in theory, it's got more going for it than the bench press in terms of all this stuff that we've just talked about. So someone's going to be sitting there like, well, I'm just going to do, that's going to be that's my thing, right? So why, in your experience, is it just you can't load it heavy enough and then it can't play that role for them?
Yeah, we have some epic training montages from my gym over the years, and we'll be loading close to 200 pounds of chains on our back, and you'll need like 3 people to take them on and off of you to the point where we ran out of chains. And then when Cam was a little kid, we would throw him on our backs, and then he would be like a dynamic load with 150 pounds of chain. It's a logistical thing. And it's also eventually based on the load placement. The load placement for a loaded push-up is going to have to be right under the scaps. You don't want to load it over the scaps because then that kind of takes away from the benefit of the movement. So you're essentially loading on the lower back. The lower back will eventually break at X load. So then you'll take away from the desired moving training effect.
Sure. Okay. So something becomes a limiting, let's take the logistics out of it, right? You've just got this infinite plate loading device or whatever. So the problem is that there is a weak link in there that is not the pressing musculature, which means, so could an argument be made then for a dip being a superior exercise? Because then you get the scapular movement, not the rotation in the hand admittedly, but your scaps are not locked against the bench. So do you see them playing a role in a lot of your athletes' training, or are they just too maybe high risk or whatever?
We don't use the dip very much, especially for the type of general fitness populations that will use like the Unbreakable training app or something like that. It just wouldn't be a qualified choice cost to benefit ratio for a vast majority of those people. They're already dealing with postural stress disorders. We're already trying to get them out of that position. And they go into a fight or flight response like this as soon as they go in. So the dip is a really interesting movement because on paper, you're like, exactly. You're actually training the vertical plane under you, and you're able to actually have the scaps move in and out. This is a beautiful thing. But most people will make the mistake of not going on dip bars. They'll go on a bench, and then they lose their position instantly. Or they'll try to make it a PR exercise where they'll go on the bench and they'll start stacking plates on their lap, and they lose their quality quotients with it. So somebody that's super proficient, like Lala has a CrossFit background, gymnastics background. Her dips look awesome. She can load them, and everyone's like, wow, I want to look like that. She's going to be one out of like 100 people that are able to do that. So I tend to stay away from dips, but I tend to get similar training effects in other vertical plane motions.
Sure. For that reason, with them being the challenge that you do you ever see them as like maybe like a test in terms of like shoulder control, stability? Like you don't have to be strong at them, but do you think someone should be striving to be able to do one proficiently? Do you think that would be a good, standard for someone?
I think some of the same mechanisms that allow somebody to be good at dips are the same ones that allow them to really perform optimally in the vertical pull pattern on pull-up variations. So a lot of the problems with dips for people is not that their shoulders don't go into the right position, is that they don't have the management of their hips and their core under them with their feet that are free floating through space. So that is more of a skill of being able to, again, go back to breathing and embracing and being able to have that set up and be able to have that translate. I tend to look at being able to dynamically move the scaps in the pull pattern out of a vertical plane pull. That is the one that we are going to keep in every single week as a key performance indicator. The dip is something that I think there's many different ways to get at that key musculature and the key skills, and we can build the pieces from different patterns and different exercise variations. I don't necessarily think it's like the super high risk thing, but in terms of novelty, and you are using your body weight as a starting load, load, it becomes very difficult not to run into the rules of novelty plus load capacity is too high too quick.
Sure. So if you're then saying that you get that from the vertical pull instead, I'm presuming that usually takes the form of like a lat pull down for you.
Correct. Yeah. So we'll do a lot of pull-up variants. Relative strength test is all about the pull-up. So we'll do chin, neutral grip, medium grip. We really don't do a whole lot of wide grip pull-ups, but that is something that we like to load in the 1 to 6 RM range.
Sure.
And that is, it's one of the best tests that we can do because there's many different ways of getting after relative strength. We can get stronger, we can build muscle, we can lose fat, we can get better at the motor skills. That's the one that we tend to really focus on, even above and beyond the press.
Sure. So in that, do you think, I think this is quite a broad programming problem, perhaps maybe you see otherwise, but you said that the pull-up is like a 1 to 6 rep range thing for you. Do you see a problem with a lot of people not having a strength-based pulling movement in their program?
Hey guys, if you're enjoying what you're watching, make sure to take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe.
Like if we take a lift, a general lift specific split, which is common, there's a squat, there's a bench press, there's a deadlift, and then if you're lucky, there's an overhead press. If you're lucky, but and then every single time the pulling movement is this thing that happens afterwards, right? So to you, does that need to change? And is the pull-up the best one that you find generally, or do you have them do like a horizontal row in that range also?
I will never program a horizontal row any less than 6 reps. It could be the primary accessory work for the day. But almost every time I see people will go squat, bench, and deadlift, and they'll do some sort of split around there. And the overhead press is then 2 pressing KPIs, 1 hinge KPI, 1 squat KPI. Hey, we're missing the entire pull pattern. For probably more than 10 years at this point, we have kept the vertical pull in as a key performance indicator. I mean, it's the hardest and heaviest lift that we program that day. And that's something that I'm a big believer in because it can hit super hard and super heavy. And we can go at things that are honestly amazing when people actually go in and actually try to perform. Again, like I'm not the biggest or the strongest person. I don't claim to be, but in terms of pulling on the vertical pattern, I can get to the point where I can get almost my body weight around my waist and be able to hit it for multiple reps. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, like why can you do that if you're not big or strong? It's because the coordination of your hips and your core are on point. You're able to have full capacity and ranges of motion at the shoulder. You're able to have strength at length, which I think is huge for the pull pattern and the vertical pull up itself. And you're able to actually coordinate that thoracic spine extending and flexing in the right places in the right times based on the motor skills.
Sure. So why, I totally agree in every sense there. But why for you then does the horizontal row not fall in that category? You said like you don't program it less than 6. I assume there's a reason for that. So why is there that distinction that this is a movement over here you're happy to push very hard and it's very beneficial, but this one less so?
So as soon as you get out of the vertical or the horizontal pull pattern, the horizontal pull pattern has this huge window where we can have variance in terms of the external and internal rotation. Horizontal pull pattern allows you to have a concentric, if you would like, into external rotation based on the integration of the upper back kicking on as the key primary mover. The first line of tension is most likely going to be your key primary mover. And we can put you into a position where you can actually externally rotate as you horizontally pull. Think about as soon as you go into the vertical pull pattern, we lose the ability to do that. The lats are going to almost automatically be your first line of tension, your first primary mover. And the lats, from a biomechanical standpoint, are internally rotation dominant upon concentric contraction. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's just something that puts you into a stronger, more stable position. So that is less amount of variance in terms of rotation, more amount of strict hand positions, shoulder positions, and we allow the shoulder blades to really just take the full range of motion from the vertical pull versus the horizontal pull. So we're able to really have more volumes in the horizontal pattern at probably higher rep ranges just because we have the ability to externally rotate. As soon as rotation goes up, load capacity kind of goes down. And as soon as we have us automatically locked into an internal rotation driven pull-up. That means load capacity is going to go sky high, and the amount of rotation specifically at the glenohumeral joint is going to go down. So it's all an interplay. Yeah. So I think both of these things go together, but just in my experience, going up into the vertical pull pattern, people can do crazy strength performances there. And that's something that getting strength at length, especially with the overhead position, there's nothing better than I've seen that can actually have you access and maintain that overhead position.
So because of that locked in position with the pull-up, would the argument be that if that pattern was performed for higher volumes, there would be more wear and tear, and that you'd be going against the thing that you're trying to achieve at the shoulder joint, which is whereas with that horizontal pull, you can get that external rotation.
That's exactly right. So, all stress is not bad. Wear and tear, it's a tough term, but essentially you have so much training mileage on your body before you need that oil change. And you want to be able to direct the highest amount of intensity at the places that are best amounted to withstand the intensity. And that is going to be sprinkling in low amounts of volume with high intensity in the vertical pull pattern. You could do a shit ton of horizontal pulling with very little shoulder stress. As long as you're letting the shoulders rotate, as long as you're opening up the thoracic spine and not executing like an asshole. So those amounts of volumes can really just compound over time and just be a little bit shoulder friendly.
Sure. No, very good. Thank you.
Where does routine fall into all this? Because in a standing position, I can argue that the brace, it can't be set without the feet.
Yeah. Routine for the pull-up or routine in general?
No, just in general, right? Obviously, there's no routine for the pull-up.
Interestingly enough, the routine for the pull-up specifically, we get these top-end strength levels from people actually going in and doing a breathe-in brace with our pull-ups. This is super interesting, and this took me a lot of years to figure out. But we'll start either on a bench or a box, and we'll start loaded because we'll be loaded out of a dip belt, but we'll have access to whatever our hand position is up overhead on the pull-up bar, and then we will be able to lower ourselves down in exactly the same shoulders, hips, breathe, core brace, and then move protocol that we would use on a squat, bench, or deadlift. And this is something that in terms of like a 1 to 3 RM, it skyrockets people's potential. But essentially we are able to anterior brace the core, manage the hips and the glutes with the adductors, and that is what allows us not to just be like free flying through space. But the routine itself is like, man, there are certain times and places where you need to be able to mentally amplify for your performance. You need to lock in, and there are certain times and places where we need to have that huge routine. That's going to be our key performance indicators. And there's other times where we just need a minimal effective prep mentally before you get into a set. I'm a big believer that, some of these high frequency powerlifting programs that are popular on Instagram today, they don't allow you to mentally engage in every single set. If you are squat, benching, and deadlifting on the same day, and then you're doing, 5 sets of 3 on each of those movements with a linear progression, how in the hell are you supposed to mentally engage and focus and do your routine 15 times in a day? I know I couldn't do that. I think the people that I work with, they have maybe 2, maybe 3 sets where they can get their mind right, they can engage, they can go through their the rehearsal and the repetition routine and go in and actually get what they need out of that top end performance. And I think everything above that just becomes a little bit more of a garbage volume. And the routine is huge. Like, it's something that I continue to practice each and every day that I lift, and I know that I will be doing that for the rest of my life. But I think people take a little bit of time to be able to get the amount of reps in, especially with breathing, bracing, pre-moving preparation, to be able to actually get strong and safe lifts off routinely.
Yeah. So going back then, do you work with the clients with the routine of the feet, with the standing positions?
We will. So the squat is going to be different than the deadlift, and the bench is going to be different than both the squat and the deadlift. But I think the hardest one is to be able to walk back a squat. There's a big reason that I'm looking at 5 monolifts over my shoulder here, is that the name of the game is being able to breathe, brace, root, then start to unrack and then move. But people struggle on the squat specifically because we actually have to do a double breath. The double breath is really difficult for people, and that's why they end up getting looser than any of the other lifts. And essentially what this would look like is you're getting up under the bar and you're able to have the shoulders go first, the hips go first, or the hips go second, nose breath, mouth breath, brace around the core, unrack, 1 step, 2 steps, a 3rd step just to get your stance right. 2nd breath has to come in, then brace, then move. Everything else doesn't take that 2nd breath. And that 2nd breath is really difficult because when people get under load, stress goes up. And then be able to chill and allow that load to actually depress you into the ground and into your position, and then have that 2nd breath under load. That's one of the hardest things that people have to learn the skill set for. I know I'm still working with that as well.
Do you think, though, in that way, the walking out of the squat is actually helpful? Because at some point, you have to learn to take a breath under load. Right? Like, there's going to be an overhead press set where you do 5 reps. We got to learn to breathe at some point. You can't.
There's more than 1 rep on something.
That's what I mean, right? So at some point you have to learn the skill of like maintaining the brace whilst taking a breath. So do you think that actually although obviously walking out is hard, in a way it's kind of like, well, you got to learn this now, tough. So do you think in a way that actually kind of helps?
I think it could help, but I also think that there's a skill set for every single movement pattern based on the amount of reps that you're placing on the system that day. So the way in which you brace for a 1RM is going to be 100% at your maximal volitional contraction capacity in terms of your brace. And then you're going to try to bring in maximal amount of air. Valsalva maneuver is going to happen, and hopefully everything just goes well. But down from 2 reps, you need to dial it down to 95, 3 reps, 90, 4 reps, 85. And I think that people need to be able to play with this, but you need to be exchanging air just enough that you can stay alive during a set. It's like the name of the game is how little can I breathe during a set so I can keep maximal amount of tension through where I need it the most. And that's the mistake that I see, especially in novice lifters do, is they'll be doing this thing where it's like, and then they're told to do that. Breathe fully out, exhale as you come up, and then breathe fully in as you descent down into your eccentric. And then they look like shit. And you're like, yeah, that's not how things work. But I think that if we can, most people just don't know what their top end brace is. So they think they're at 100% and they're actually at 50%. And then when you go, hey, you got to breathe on this set, it's a 5 of 5, they bring it down to like 20% and they're wondering why they can't keep good form.
Do you find in those scenarios, once you teach that individual, like this is how you breathe, this is how you brace, this is hopefully how you maintain it between your reps, how often do you find then that actually becomes the limiting factor in the rep number that are achieved, as opposed to like, I cannot move the bar anymore through like force, if that makes sense? Like,
oh yeah.
Okay.
Limiting factors are always going to be the combination between the amount of minimal effective brace plus your breath. We do something called the goblet squat challenge. Goblet squat challenge, if you really want to hate your life, go in and do your goblet squat challenge on any sort of leg day. Usually do it last because you're going to want to quit your session after you actually get it done. So what you're going to do is take 50% of your body weight in dumbbell form, and you're going to put it into a goblet position in front of your body. And then you're going to go for maximal amount of reps that are unbroken, meaning that you can't rest at the top and you can't breathe at the top, and they have to be to whatever your optimal depth is. And you tend to see, so we've had tens of thousands of people go through and do the goblet squat challenge. We do it right inside of the Pain-Free Performance Specialist certification to see people's breathing and bracing and also their squat movement proficiency. And we see crazy things. We had Coach Charles Staley, like one of the best strength coaches of all time. And he is an amazing squatter. He's squatted a lot of weight, even at his extended age, and he could not break the 25 reps. And it was because he was so locked in to only bracing maximally, because he was doing nothing more than like 4 or 5 reps at a time in squat. So all of a sudden, the ability to breathe and exchange air in something like the goblet squat, it wasn't that he wasn't strong, it wasn't that he wasn't a good squatter, he didn't have the skill to necessarily exchange air. And then you have Clifton Harsky, who works for me at Pain-Free Performance. Cliff's a great athlete. He has a lot of different movement diversity. He's done animal flow and functional kettlebell training. He does Pain-Free Performance, and he is just a great mover, and he's relatively strong. He's not that big. He was able to get 73 reps at 50% of his body weight. And I think he probably could have done more. And that's as much as I've ever seen somebody do. But you look at Cliff and you're like, you're in shape, but it's not like I'd like stop you at Target and be like, bro, did you compete in the Olympia this year? Or like, holy shit, did you squat 1,000 pounds last week in competition? He looks like an average dude, but an average dude that knows how to minimally effective breathe and brace and do the combination of those two things together, they show up in these types of strength challenges. And I think that that is a really intriguing thing. And that's the reason that we like to see movement mastery at that level, especially for the squat pattern, be able to be something like 25 reps of goblet squats. We see people going into the 50s and 60s routinely, and it's something that is a whole on movement mastery of a bunch of different challenges all in one to be able to show, what is the proficiency of your brace plus your movement plus your breathing.
For someone who doesn't have the required level of sadomasochism to do that, right? is the loaded carry where can that come in there? Like a longer distance loaded carry, I assume, is going to do a similar job there.
So in 2017, I wrote the first ever peer-reviewed article on loaded carry strength metrics, and it was in the NSCA journal. And it was a really cool article because we looked at about 1,200 subjects and we classified them into 3 distinct groups. We had a post-physical therapy group. It's like you're fucked up in some way and you're trying to get back to training. And then we had a general fitness population. And then we have an elite sports performance athlete. And we had a lot of different subjects, but we tested them all at 30 seconds. And we wanted to see what their capacities were and how much they could carry for 30 seconds. So the metric was being able to be at 50% of your body weight post-physical therapy, no matter if you were in for a hangnail or a total hip replacement before you got discharged. So that means if I'm a 200-pound man, I'm going with a 50-pound dumbbell in each hand. I'm able to actually walk that for 30 seconds, keeping quality quotient up. The next level up from that was a loaded carry at 100% of body weight. And that was for general fitness population. So if I'm 200 pounds, I was going 100 pounds plus 100 pounds walking. So we did this in a combination of dumbbells. And if for people that were a little bit heavier, we were introducing the trap bar at that point. The trap bar was elevated up so they didn't have to deadlift it. They just picked it and carried it. And then for elite sports performance athletes, we were at 200% of body weight. So if I'm 200 pounds, I am taking the trap bar and I am walking with 400 pounds on it for 30 seconds. And I felt really good, almost 10 years ago about that article. And then as T Nation does, is that they read the article and they go, holy shit, we need to get this on T Nation because people are going to go fucking crazy. So they post the article, like I wrote a different piece for it, a little bit more hardcore for them, and essentially just had those same metrics. And all of a sudden I see hundreds of thousands of people going through and trying to see what their strength metric was on loaded carries. That 200% wasn't enough. Weak people that didn't know how to breathe and brace, they were like, oh, 200%. Everyone thinks they're an elite sports performance athlete, by the way. It's like, hey, I lifted for 2 years. I think I'm making $10 million on the field on Sundays. No, that's not you. But they were going in and they were like, hey, the really weak people that didn't have a skill of movement and they couldn't breathe and brace, they were bitching and moaning about 100 and 200% being way too much. Who could ever do this? And then I was seeing people, especially powerlifters, strongmen, and CrossFit athletes, they were able to skyrocket above and beyond that 200%. I was seeing things that I couldn't believe. I was seeing 137-pound females touch almost 300% loaded carries for 30 seconds. And it was just because, yes, they were strong. Also, they were relatively strong because they didn't have a whole lot of body fat on their system, but they were also being able to breathe and brace and coordinate that brace through the carry pattern. And it was a beautiful thing to see. This all came to a head where I got an Instagram message and it was just like one of these videos. Back then, somebody would send you a video and they didn't know what it was, so they like blur it out. And you're like, holy shit, am I about to get like a dick pic? So you're like, I don't know. Like I saw it's like a female. So I'm like, okay, that's a good starting point. So I'm like, I click in on it and I'm like, okay, it's somebody doing a loaded carry. And then right away she sees me click on it. I accepted the message. She goes, is this good? ? Then I click in and she's doing a 352% body weight loaded carry for 30 seconds. And it looked like she wasn't straining. She wasn't really doing too much. I said, what do you do? I'm thinking about getting into powerlifting. Do that. Do that. Amazing.
And strong woman and everything else. So that word. Now, when you're testing those in those testing or assessing those, again, was there a specific pace it was done at, or is it just whatever pace allows you to keep the required posture and it's just 30 seconds?
Correct. Yeah. So as soon as they lost those two key quality metrics, their spine position or their ability to manage rotation, you would call it. But also we would be linearly testing them. So they would go for, 50%, and then they go to 75%. And we weren't just like putting max load on them right away. It was just where could they get with a good quality quotient.
And I assume that straps no straps, because someone's going to try this now.
No straps.
Okay, so 350% with no straps.
I'm not recommending anyone try 350%. That was like an outlier of all outliers.
No, I'm just curious as to
200%. I think that's most likely, if you want to play with this, what you should be doing.
Yeah, sure.
Somebody like me, I can carry 475. I'm about 190 pounds. I can do it for 30 seconds off the trap bar. Anything above 200% has a... more is not always better. It's like we've saw that at 200%, you're like, wow, these people are really awesome. This is what you should most likely be able to do. But if somebody did 205%, that was most likely no better than 200% with in terms of staying healthy or just performing better.
Yeah. I mean, the reason I asked that question specifically is because there will be a similar response when you're quoting like 300, 250, whatever. People will be of the perception like, well, that must be done with straps. Like, no one can grip that. And you're like, well, actually.
Well, grip strength is a big part of creating a radiation and being able to have that reactionary brace. That is the starting point. That is your contact on the load. I think a lot of people are talking about grip strength today. It's like 10 years ago, I was talking about all this unsexy shit that nobody wanted to talk about health and longevity. Longevity 10 years ago was like, oh, you must be training old people. And today, longevity means, oh, you must be optimizing. And it's like a totally different conversation, but everyone is perseverating today about all the research on grip strength. Grip strength is going to make you a healthier person. It's going to lead to you living longer. It's going to lead to increased health span. I agree with all of that. But then people go, okay, grip strength is the key. And then they sit there and they're like, this is going to make me live longer. Like they're using grip trainers from 1975. And it's like, no, it's a correlation between grip strength and your ability to neurologically irradiate into your hands as the metric of how we're testing it is going to lead to you most likely just being a stronger person. So a stronger person is going to be a healthier person. A healthier person is going to live longer, and a healthier person is most likely going to live a healthier life for longer ages.
Sure.
You're not just going to do grip work and think.
No, I'm glad you said that because there are people that are doing that. Grip work's supposed to make you live. So that's all. It's like, that's a downstream effect of all the other things.
Yeah. And since we've talked about undoing postural damage, I guess, for want of a better word, a lot. How often do you have to prescribe like extensor work or like basic opening your hand against resistance? Because you get strongman, you got a lot of powerlifters and so everyone's clenched. How much time do you spend gripping things as opposed to opening your hand again? Do you ever find that you run into like carpal tunnel or chronic elbow issues or things like that, or do you find that's really rare?
I rarely do acute extensor work for the forearms. It's really not just something in our arsenal. It's not something that's super needed. I think that you'll naturally get sort of this isometric effect as soon as you do the grip. The grip is not just your flexors. Your grip is the ability to be able to create extensors, flexors together, and then have all the muscles like the brachioradialis that flies through on top and above. So I think that all of those get trained in isometric pretty well. And very rarely is somebody from a strength capacity perspective needing to do a lot of this work. People that do need to do a lot of this work are people that are doing this.
Yeah, sure. Now, I mean, we've got you've set a benchmark there for the loaded carry, which I think is a cool one. But I'm interested in what your kind of benchmarks are for a strength-orientated population with regards to the split squat, or whatever variation you choose. Because I find your experience might be different, that people really underestimate what's possible.
Oh yeah,
on a split squat, you get like an 800-pound squat. And I use 50-pound dumbbells, and you're like, that's a cool warm up. So, like in your experience, like what benchmark should, if the split squat is going to be this tenet of creating a functional human being who can perform well long term, what should people be aiming for if they are a strength orientated person to do on those patterns?
So you'll introduce the lunge pattern out of the base split squat, which is essentially splitting your stance out, going down and going up, and the floor actually hitting your knee before you can achieve full range of motion. From there, the next jump up would be a full range of motion split squat with feet on the same level of ground. So you'd go up on elevation on the front, elevation on the back, be able to go down through a complete range of motion. That is where the split squat will be. Very quickly, we want to move from that deficit split squat, is what we'll refer to it as a Bulgarian split squat or a rear foot elevated split squat. I love that one because that allows us to train full range of motion, and it is the perfect athletic movement to be able to have maximal muscular recruitment and a huge amount of load capacity. The reason that we like the Bulgarian split squat specifically, it is the perfect hybrid movement. It's a hybrid movement because you'll have a forward knee position relative to the toes. So you'll have a lot of quadriceps dominancy, but also you'll see the strongest people will also go into a hip hinge at the hips. So they'll have glutes be a primary mover alongside the quads and have the hamstrings just holding all this stuff together from like a short and isometric position. And then we'll also have a forward torso angle that will be a combination between a squat and a hinge pattern. That is actually the definition of a lunge pattern versus a squat and a hinge. A lot of people don't really understand this one. They go, okay, just lunging. Okay, it's single leg work. Not quite. It's its own pattern biomechanically. It is the true hybrid pattern, which has all the benefits from knee over toe quadricep dominancy in a squat pattern with the ability to hip hinge at the hips to have more of a posterior hip dominancy with the glutes and the hamstrings. This is why the load capacity is so fucking high when it comes to Bulgarian split squats. So just thinking that it's going to be a quad workout or it's going to be a glute hit, no, it can be both. And when we're chasing top end strength metrics, if this is a key performance indicator lift, which I will cycle in every like 3 to 4 blocks for lower body directed work, this is something that you need to have the combination of this hybrid pattern. That pattern will look very similar to the trap bar deadlift in terms of angulation of the limbs. So you have forward knee plus hip hinge. That's going to be super strong. Back to your question though, we won't necessarily be testing anyone in a base level split squat or a deficit split squat. We'll like to see progressions in the Bulgarian split squat specifically. And those are ones that I like to get. This is going to sound like a lot for many people, but if you can get your body weight in your hands in dumbbell form and you can hit it for 5 reps, that means that you're doing really, really well. Sure. So if I'm 200 pounds, I got 100 pounds in each hand. I really like dumbbells for this specific exercise because we can change the position of the bells relative to the front foot, that is the working leg. If you can hit 5 reps there through a full and complete range of motion, that means that you're doing awesome. And that is just a starting point. With Pain-Free Performance Crew, we've been chasing some crazy Bulgarian split squats. We've had Cliff go up over 400 pounds for 4 reps on Bulgarian split squats. I've personally done 190 in a goblet for 5, and I've also done 150 in hands down to the side for 5. And these are things that are super hard straining reps, huge amounts of muscular recruitment, a minimal amount of stress at the lower back. And then the benefit is this bilateral phenomenon of being able to have the right performance plus the left performance be more than just your bilateral squat. So you can get more loading relative to the single leg.
Sure. To ask what is maybe a stupid question, but you mentioned the dumbbells being angled specifically there. How are you doing that? What specifically are you doing that to center over the work here? Because again, people need to execute these better, and this is done wrong all the time. Yeah.
So what I like to do, so if I have 2 dumbbells down to the side, the one that is going to be on the outside of the working leg will be held in a neutral grip position. We want this to be tight to the body. We want it to be right to the side of the knee, and we want this to be the anchor. And then the opposite one is the one where we start to chill with a spiral effect. So we bring this down, we allow it to then pronate, and we bring it right over center of mass. So the one on the opposite side of the back leg up, that hand should be directly over center of mass. But we need to be able to actually rotate into it, to press down, and my hand's going to be like this with the dumbbell. And I will use that to be able to be more over that front side. But I don't like when people cue, hey, just use the front side as the working leg. The back side shouldn't work. When you got 200 pounds on your system and you're trying to hit reps with it, and then you have to figure out that you have to repeat it on the opposite side, your back leg is going to be working extraordinarily hard in a hard isometric. And there's nothing wrong with that. But being able to have those laces down into the bench, being able to actually torque into the bench is going to be really key for your stability. Most people suck at Bulgarian split squats, not because they're not strong, but because they're not stable and they're not agile on a single leg stance.
Mm-hmm. Sure. In that context, again, this may sound really dumb and nuanced, but you mentioned there about the back leg is doing work. Do you see then a big problem is you're training, say you are training this for strength and this is heavy, they'll do this. So the right leg does the working, most of the working, the left leg, and then they'll just go, cool, straight in. Like there's no rest. And like, do you think that's optimal, or do you have your athletes like have a mini break or a full break or whatever the prescription is so that back leg that has been isometrically working can go in fresh, or do you just have them go straight in?
I just go straight in.
You go.
If you drop the weights, you lost.
Okay, so like for you, that's a purposeful part of the challenge. Okay.
Some context to this though, you want your non-dominant leg being forward to go, because you want that to be the freshest. That is going to put in a vast majority of the work. But then you have your dominant leg coming back in, and if it's slightly pre-fatigued, that's fine. That's your dominant leg. So you're getting that in anyways. But if you do it on the opposite, very many times people aren't going to be able to repeat bouts. So if you hit 5 on your right being the dominant one as your first one that you go with, you only get 3 or 4 on the left, and people think they're a piece of shit. So if you are doing any sort of single leg work and it is non-alternating single leg work, always start with your non-dominant side first, because that is going to be the focal point. That's going to be the weak link that you want to bring up. That's where you want to be the freshest and push it the hardest. And then it's okay if you move on to your dominant side where you're a little bit pre-fatigued. That's just part of the game.
With all the benefits that you've espoused there about the Bulgarian or split squats in general, which again, I very much agree with, what makes you draw the line at a split squat / lunge as opposed to going the next step to like a B stance squat? So that's going to be, obviously it's a step closer to the squat, so I get why maybe you wouldn't, but is there a reason that you don't do that, or do you see that it's kind of pointless because it's a hybrid between the two? What's your opinion on those?
So that will be first question for you. Where does the term B stance come from? Because nobody can answer this.
That's a great question. I wish I could tell you. I mean, we can just rename it right now. We have the power.
We call it the kickstand.
Yeah, kickstand is the other thing I would refer to.
We always joke around functional kettlebell training. We use a whole lot of kickstand, and then all the people that will be inside of other kettlebell training certifications will be like, oh, this is B stance. And you're like, what does B stance stand for? Nobody's been able to answer it in 5 years.
No, it's great. And I'm glad you said it.
Including us.
I referred to it as that, assuming that that's what you would know it as. If I say kickstand, he's going to be like, what are you referring to? So, okay.
No, so we'll use Bulgarian split squat or any sort of split squat variant, and then that will evolve into lunge variants, and then true single leg variants that are only one leg on the ground at a time. Those will be more of this hybrid position where we will have a hip hinge plus a forward knee. That is its own pattern. But when you're going into, how about single leg squats off the box, or you're going into kickstand squats, it's going to mirror a squat mechanic. And the big difference there is going to be the pelvic orientation, the pelvic position. As soon as I go into a kickstand dumbbell goblet squat, something like that, the pelvis is actually going to be symmetrical the entire time. If you're doing your kickstand right, you should be kickstanding just enough to have it as a base of support and not actually rotate the innominates of the pelvis. As soon as you go into the lunge pattern, you are going to be rotating opposite direction at the pelvis. So anytime that you're going into some sort of lower body directed single leg work, we can still hinge on a single leg. We can still squat on a single leg, but in order for us to have good mechanics and good form, I want the pelvis still to be symmetrical.
So because I know that's probably why they suck more for a start, right? Because they're challenging that. But, people are going to say, well, I'll just do some kickstand work or B-stance work, whatever. And that does the job. Like John's saying, this is important, so I can do that. But fundamentally, they are different patterns, and that's why they need to be trained that way.
Exactly. Yeah. And we've seen that. In terms of sprint or running mechanics, they're going to line up best with the lunge pattern. And it's going to be the carry pattern as well. That's the big differentiator, is going to be the pelvic orientation.
So I need to ask you about the book, right? Because I was familiar with your work because you've helped me in the past, right? So I've seen the other programs. Then you send me a text or email saying, look, I'm going to say, I wasn't expecting a brick, to come through the mail. So how did this whole thing come to be?
Oof, that's a loaded question.
Yes, it is. Well, it's a loaded book.
It's
it
a
weighs
loaded
like
book.
5 pounds.
Well, let's take it back even a couple years before this book was even in conversation. So I remember being back in this exact gym in 2018 in December, and we announced right there and then that next year moving forward, we would launch the Pain-Free Performance Specialist certification. We had 75 diehards in this room, and it was one of the best certifications of all time before it was even a certification. And we announced right there and then that things are going to be taking a different path, and Pain-Free Performance training was going to be the Pain-Free Performance Specialist certification. And I thought that was super cool because 2018 was like this awesome year. You brought me in to work with you. I was writing all over the place. I was traveling. I was going all over the world teaching. And it was like this launching pad, but I didn't think it was going to be going the direction that it ended up going. You know, many people would think like, oh, I watched the Fixing Dave Tate series. Oh, John's working with powerlifters. Wow, now that he's working with Dave, he must just be really wanting to work with powerlifters now. It wasn't necessarily that. I think one of the biggest things that I learned from working with you had nothing to do with powerlifting. It had nothing to do with strength sport. It had everything to do with what I wanted to chase for the next 10 years, which was health and longevity. You know, having an icon like yourself and having the humble work that I was able to do with you, it opened me up to being like, man, we worked for 10 months. We worked for 10 months for you to do 2 things. Hold on a second, though. Those 2 things were achieved, but it wasn't just the squat. And for anyone,
for the people who haven't seen that, yes. What were the 2 things?
So the first thing was Dave's thing. Which was he had some crazy reverse band, spider bar, box squat.
Yep.
And he wanted to hit a PR on it.
Yep.
And that was the big key performance indicator that we were working on. And that was like the North Star for all the bullshit that he had to endure doing things that he didn't want to do, trying to rebuild the movement system. But the second thing came up later on in the process because your son had asked you to walk a 5K with him. And your son opened up the door for me today. And I was like, man, this is cool. This is cool. I wonder if Dave did this, but he opened up the door and the first thing I thought was that. And later on in the process, you know, things were progressing. You know, the squat was progressing. Dave was getting in the walks. He was walking right out on the trail out here, trying to get in a mile every now and then, you know, fighting it every way. But the goal was to be able to go in and walk a 5K with your son that asked you to do it. And not to speak for Dave, but I don't think Dave thought he was in the position that he was able to go in and do that safely with his son. And we started working in different things. We started getting a little bit of cardio up, a little bit of daily movement, trying to rebuild the positions and stuff. And 10 months later, you know, it wasn't like a linear process, but 10 months later, Dave was able to hit his squat. And I get that text message, and it was just nothing on the text. It was just the squat. I was like, yeah, oh, that was awesome.
Yeah.
You know, that was really exciting. So that was like, it was like a Thursday, or I think it was a Friday night. It was a Friday night that happened. And then cool, I like said, hey, great job. This is amazing. But then the next day, you sent me a picture of you and your son finishing the 5K. He was looking so happy. You looked so fulfilled and happy that you went in and did this and got out of your comfort zone to do it. And I put 2 and 2 together that, man, this was a pain-free PR. This was Dave's, you know, he has many PRs, but this was a true lifelong pain-free PR. Dave went in and did his performance. He did the thing that he wanted to do with the squat. But then he turned around the next day, and he was able to walk that 5K. He wasn't in an ice bath the next morning. He wasn't all fucked up in a wheelchair. He was out there being a family man, being a father, and being a strong person to be able to go out and do something that he didn't think he was going to do, but he was able to enjoy that. Right then and there on that text message with that picture, I said, hey, like my 10-year career of working with professional athletes and working with the strongest people in the world, it's been great. It's taught me so much, but this is the type of shit. Like I cried that day. I was like, this is amazing. Like it was a whirlwind ride, you know, coming into Columbus, training, you're doing all this stuff on media, and then seeing it all being able to come to a culmination of a 5K of all things. But getting that picture, I knew I wanted that. I selfishly wanted that feeling again. And I wanted it again, and again. Because I've got people at the NFL, worked in the NBA. I've worked with Olympians. We've won medals. We've done really interesting things, worked with some of the strongest people in the world. I still love doing that. I'm still doing that. But the thing that I learned in that process was we are doing this for a greater reason than just what's happening in the gym. We're doing this to test ourselves for life and be able to step up our lives to be able to give back. And it's like, man, if we're not giving back to our family, if we're not giving back to our kids, we're not giving back to our spouse, we're not giving back to our employees, our community, like, what the fuck are we doing? And I wanted to help more people be able to regain their health, to be able to extend their longevity, to give them back their lives again, and to be able to do things with physical autonomy, to do whatever the hell they want to do because they've earned the right to do it. And that was like an epiphany moment. That was a switch that I'll never forget because, it took a number of years to kind of figure things out. But that was my North Star then. That was something that I'll never forget. And that was something that lined up my next, 10 years of what we've been doing. You started asking me, what have you done the last 8 years? It's been focusing on that. It's been focusing on that and never giving up on strength and conditioning and training hard and going heavy and having that feel in the gym, but making sure that we never are winning in the gym and losing in life. I want people to be able to win across the board and be able to have the gym be the place that can potentiate them. And I think just that mindset shift for myself as a coach, I think it comes with age, it comes with maturity, it comes with my changing seasons of my body in my life. But that is the thing that today gets me the most excited. I'll work with people from all walks of life today, but everyone's goal is still the same, is that they want to live a great life. They want to live a memorable life. They want to do what they love to do forever. And many of those people is lifting, but they want to make sure that they're not sitting out on their life on the sidelines while their family or their community is moving forward. They want to be actively engaged. And that is the type of feeling when you can get results that way and also see the PRs happening in the gym. It's addicting. It's as addicting as anything that I've ever dealt with. And as soon as you can start delivering those types of life-changing results to people, you're like, this is all I want to do. And that started in late 2018, 2019, kicked me into pain-free performance. Pain-free performance took on a whole new life of its own. Pain-free performance went from, 10, 15 courses a year, 2017, 2018, till we ran 120 courses in 2019. I ran 42 courses all across the world myself, and I had my team run almost 100 more courses in that year. And I was flying high on the exact feeling that I mentioned with Dave, wanting to give that to more people. I was going from Germany to Hong Kong and back and forth and traveling and going nuts and training hard before the sessions and then going in and going 2 hours over teaching. And I did this for 3 years. There was COVID in there, so we got shut down for 6 months, which is a totally different story. But I was flying high on the feeling of trying to best serve others. And I love more than anything to be out there helping coaches, helping physical therapists. We have physicians coming through, wanting to train for health and longevity. And pain-free performance morphed into something more than just training intelligently. It was almost like a mantra. It was a mindset of how we use training to actually better our lives. And you can only run that type of schedule for so long. I'm a type AAA personality. I want to do everything to my best of my ability. And I want to work as hard as anyone has ever worked. And I want to give back. It was never about me. It was about everyone who I was working with. But I ran that type of schedule 2020, 2021. I found myself in 2022, very similar shape as what Dave was in when he called me. I was all fucked up. I had developed some bad GI issues. I developed some really devastating issues where I was unable to even get out of bed most times, just due to stress, due to redlining my system for far too long. And it got to the point where I drive my son to school every single morning. I think that's the coolest thing in the world, that I get to spend that 25 minutes with my son one-on-one. And I was getting up at 3 or 4 a.m. every single morning, and I was waiting 3 to 4 hours to try to have my system calm down just to have the opportunity to drive my son. I was like, man, this shit sucks. Like, I know something needs to change. My entire team's growing, teams going all over the world. We did 200 events in 2022. And at the end of 2022, even while I'm in this shape, I wanted to develop a new certification, lifelong performance. It was our training model. So I developed the certification, and I said, hey, I'm going to give it in my hometown. I'm going to drive 90 minutes and go into Chicago and give this for the first time. I'm going to bring 30 people in with me. And I am going to give this brand new curriculum that people have been waiting for because I'm so fucking excited about it because it's going to change the game for these people. And I go into Chicago, and 2 days before, I had full body poison ivy. I got it out. It was summer in Madison, Wisconsin, Lake Town. And me trying to do too much. I was on business calls. I was pulling weeds in the yard with AirPods in, and I was in a bathing suit rubbing poison ivy all over my body, unbeknown to me. And I know that the poison ivy's hitting me. And it's not like, hey, it's a little bit on your face. I had 70% of my body covered. And it was a medical emergency because it got onto my groin, got onto my face, and it got onto some places you don't even want to talk about. And this was all happening all at once. Lala and I drive out with Taylor, one of the guys who's worked for me for a long time, who's been right here at this cert in this gym. And I drive out and I know that I am going to be fucked this weekend. I get up on stage on Saturday morning and I give a 20-minute talk, and it took everything out of me to the point where I had to lay down on the ground. And I wouldn't give up on the session because I had my entire staff in there. I had 30 VIPs in there. And for an entire day, I went from 20 minutes of talking to 20 minutes of laying down on the ground with ice packs on me. And my poison ivy was getting worse. My GI issues were going absolutely insane. I was probably at a 9 or a 10 out of pain. And that weekend, I got COVID as well. So I got the true trifecta. That Saturday night, because we do the 2-day events, Lala put me into a bath at the W Hotel in Chicago and poured oatmeal all over me in the bath while I could barely breathe, and I couldn't sleep and I couldn't do anything because I was in so much pain. And I got majority of my staff to teach the Sunday for me. I went up there and taught a little bit, and I ended up getting in my car Sunday at 5 o'clock in Chicago, and I didn't go home. I drove myself right to the hospital. Got checked into the hospital, and they couldn't believe the shape I was in. They didn't know whether to take, note of the GI issues, whether to treat me for COVID, or to be able to go into my groin and figure out this poison ivy issue. And at that point in time, it was a dumpster fire. I ended up a couple weeks later in surgery. I ended up a couple weeks after that, not able to train, barely able to walk down to my mailbox. And I was exactly where I didn't want to be. And I did all of this trying to educate others on health and longevity. And I burned myself out as bad as I could possibly imagine. And I was forced to go back in, just like my clients do, and have to rebuild the system, rebuild my body, rebuild the process, and fall back on my foundations, which was the education that I've been teaching my entire life. And that was a humbling moment, because I knew that I couldn't go on the way that I was going. I was flying high because I wanted to serve others. And I wasn't serving myself. I was over-serving myself. I was training too hard. I was traveling too much. I was too high stress. I was opening businesses, doing all this stuff. And it humbled me and it put me down, and it showed me that you need to make a change. It's a long way to say that by Thanksgiving of 2022, I was barely moving around. I can't believe I got on a flight. I went down to Florida to spend Thanksgiving with my son, Lala, and my stepdad and my mom. And I get a call on Thanksgiving Day, and I'm not training at this point. I can barely really move or doing anything. And I get a call from Glenn Cordoza on Thanksgiving. Hey, what's going on? Never spoke to you before, but this is really good. I read all your books. Like, I'm a huge fan of all these. Like, what's going on? He tells me, I've been to Pain-Free Performance. I've been training on your programs. This is the future. It needs to be a book. And at that level of what I was dealing with, I didn't think that there was going to be a future for Pain-Free Performance. I barely thought there was going to be a future for me. I was mentally down on everything as well, to the point where I decided to do this book on that call because I didn't know if I was going to be able to continue on. I didn't know if I was going to be able to be here for anybody, let alone the students. So I said, hey, if this is the last thing I do, I want this to be it. So I didn't tell Glenn any of this. I wanted him to sign the book with me and get on the book contract. So I said, hey, I'm in. And we started down this journey. Luckily enough, I started feeling better. I put my pieces back together, huge support from Lala and Cam and my family. The point where my mom was having to come in for some weekends just to support me because Lala works full time and she doesn't have time to, deal with a lot of the issues that I was having. She's not going to give up her stuff, and nor should she. So a lot of my family came up around me and got me back to go in, change gyms, got into a different environment, started to rebuild my body. And in the process of rebuilding myself, we built this book. And it's that way it is, and it's 576 pages, and it took 3 years, and it is an over-delivery in every single aspect of what is humanly possible with the textbook, because I thought it would be my last thing that I would do. And luckily it's not, and I found my way forward, and I was able to make some strategic changes. I was able to get greater people around me at Pain Free Performance. I was able to take myself off the road a little bit more and be able to deep dive in on some of the core concepts that we were teaching. But this was the thing that I was focused on to be able to bring to not only the coaches out there in the industry, not only the personal trainers, but I wanted people like myself, when I was down and out, to be able to read something like this and have a rebuild plan. I wanted to be able to have my mom and my stepdad at 75 and 82 years old to be able to go in and be able to train on these programs. I wanted a power lifter that was broken down and on the verge of quitting lifting altogether to be able to have a plan forward so they could rediscover what they wanted to do with their life so they could do it forever. And 3 years later, we got this book done, and it's one of the proudest things that I've done, because I was pushed to the brink of not knowing if I was going to be able to continue on. But everyone coming around me and being able to empower me and being able to get me back on track, this is not for me, and it's not a victory lap for me. It's a victory lap for everyone at Pain Free Performance. It's a victory lap for my entire network, everyone who's had a hand in this, my family, my son. I dedicated it to my son. Without them, this wouldn't be here. But, even 4 weeks into this being available for people, we hit it out of the park, because I think that feeling, that grit, it comes through in all the pages. And it's not just another textbook. It's my life's work, and it's all of my life's experiences. It's all of my life's mentors. The name Dave Tate is in there many times, because all those mentors and influences got us to the point where we're able to put this down on the table at Elite FTS right here, right now, today. It's an amazing journey.
It's a great piece of work.
This might be a morbid question, but I think it's relevant. Do you think it would be the product it is if when creating it, you didn't think it might be the last thing you were going to do?
No.
Do you know what I mean? Like, in a way, was it as horrible as I'm sure that was, and I don't mean to downplay that, in a way, was it a perfect storm to lead to the best thing that you could possibly create?
Yes. It absolutely was the perfect storm. When your back's pushed up against the wall and you think that this is what you're going to leave, this is what you're going to leave your family, this is what you're going to leave the industry that you love, the vocation that you're in. I was lucky to be able to bring that type of mentality to it, but I was also extraordinarily lucky to be able to have Glenn with me. Mm-hmm. Glenn has the same exact tenacious mentality that I do. He doesn't want to do anything half-assed. He doesn't want to do anything except for 100% and push the limits of what was possible. And Glenn pushed me to get out and be my best. And that is hard to do. And Glenn was able to extract things from me in this book because we did a vast majority of it in expert interview. Mm-hmm. So we spent about 3,500 hours to get this book out, but a vast majority, probably 1,000 of those hours were done on 3 to 4 hour expert interviews, mm-hmm. where he would interview me on every single aspect of everything, just drilling me with questions. He would get a transcript that was like 400 pages long, and then he would extract every piece of information that I never had said before, or at least said in that way. Mm-hmm. And I think that came to a head, and I realized that, hey, we had something special here. When I was handing this to Pain Free Performance master instructors, and they were like, holy shit, we've never taught it like this before. Mm-hmm. Oh, I've never heard this concept be able to be educated like this. You never even expanded upon this. All these articles, all the podcasts, all the TV that we've done, there's things in there that I think are clear, they're concise, they're systemized, they're sequenced in such a way that you could read it and be able to stack the concepts. And I think that wouldn't have been possible without Glenn, of course, but without me wanting to not just do a book, but if that's going to be the thing that I do last, I want this to be able to stand the test of time.
At what point in the process did he get made aware of your health status, and what was the reaction? Because obviously, like you said, he didn't want him to know that you were as sick as you were, but obviously that only lasted so long. So when you're like, oh, hey, by the way, how did that what happened there, out of curiosity?
I made it 3 or 4 months into the process of being able to get on the interviews, be able to start the writing process, give Glenn what he needed in terms of getting out to our live in-person events. And I never said anything. And I made it my goal every single day to be able to drive my son to school. And then the only other thing that I was going to be able to get done, aside from coaching my clients, was to be able to devote my energy into making sure that Glenn didn't know anything was up. Mm-hmm. And once I was feeling better, I let him know, hey, I was actually in surgery, and hey, I wasn't training, and hey, my mom's actually staying with me and giving me sitz baths, like crazy stuff. And he couldn't believe it. But I think that the respect factor of, hey, you made this happen despite all this other things going on, that was the bond that brought it together. And that brought us another 2.5 years to not, hey, let's finish this book, but let's fucking create something. Let's create something that pushes the boundaries.
And how can people go about getting it?
You can get it anywhere books are sold. Amazon is going to be the best place. They have it on sale, and they also have it on Amazon Prime.
All right. And how can people go about finding you?
Social media is a great place at Dr. John Rusin, Instagram, Facebook, and also YouTube. And then painfreetraining.com is the pain-free performance site. And then drjohnrusin.com is my hub for all things.
All right. In the most respectful manner, and I may not word this the right way, what you went through shows you the when I contacted you, I was coming off the back end of 2 heart surgeries, as you know. So I was coming off something just like that. Now you know what you did for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
We're done. All content you see on this channel and at elitefts.com is created by, take a guess, Elite FTS. If you want to help support the content, head over to elitefts.com and pick up literally anything that you need to be able to get more jacked and strong.